A powerful man tries everything to cure his son's blindness, but nothing works. The boy, 7 years old, lives in a silent world until he meets a girl from the streets who sees him differently. While the father objects, the boy grows closer and closer to the girl, believing she can help him see. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the penthouse of the Barbican estate in the City of London was the perfect picture of solitude dressed in luxury. Anthony Edwards, one of the most influential businessmen in the country, owner of the largest network of private hospitals in the UK, gazed at the city through the enormous glass windows. The skyline, filled with skyscrapers, seemed small before the magnitude of his fortune, yet insignificant compared to the weight he carried in his heart. His tired eyes shifted from the urban landscape to watch his son, Matthew, a 7-year-old boy who was delicately tracing his fingers over a braille book. The small fingers moved across the pages with a skill that still astonished Anthony. In his study, the walls were covered with diplomas and certificates, proof of his professional success, contrasting with the dozens of medical reports scattered across the mahogany desk that attested to his greatest personal failure, the inability to make his son see again. Matthew. "It's time for your medicine," said Celeste, the nurse hired to care exclusively for the boy. She came from Newcastle and carried in her voice a melody of the Northeast that made the atmosphere less formal. "I don't want to," Matthew replied, his voice barely audible. "These medicines never work anyway." Anthony felt his heart tighten. At 45, he commanded a business empire that employed thousands of people and closed multi-million-pound deals with a simple signature, yet he couldn't convince his own son to take his medicine. The helplessness consumed him day after day. "Son, please," Anthony approached, sitting beside the boy on the Italian leather sofa. "This one is different. It came from Switzerland. Dr. Evans said it has shown promising results in cases like yours." "Like mine?" The boy snapped the book shut. "There are no cases like mine, Dad. You always say that and it never works." Anthony sighed, looking at Celeste, who remained silent, holding the medicine bottle. The nurse knew this scene well, repeated almost daily for the last 3 years. 3 years since the accident that had taken not only Matthew's sight, but also his mother, Louise. 3 years of consultations with the world's best specialists, experimental treatments and alternative therapies. 3 years of hope followed by disappointment. "It's all right, Celeste," Anthony said, defeated. "Leave it for later." The nurse nodded and quietly left the room. Matthew opened the book again, his fingers finding the exact page where he had left off. "What are you reading?" Anthony asked, trying to reconnect with his son. "A book about constellations," the boy answered without looking up. "Ironically, about things I'll never see." The businessman felt the weight of those words. Matthew had always been a brilliant child, with an intelligence that surprised his teachers even before he turned 4. Now at 7, his intellect remained impressive, but it was shrouded in a thick layer of bitterness that all the money in the world couldn't penetrate. "Matthew, I promise I will find a cure. No matter how much it costs, no matter where it is, I will do the impossible." The boy didn't answer. His silence was more painful than any words he could have spoken. Anthony stood up, straightened his impeccable suit and walked to his personal study. He closed the door and allowed himself a moment of weakness he would never show in public. His mobile phone vibrated. It was Richard, his personal assistant. "Mr. Edwards, I'm calling to confirm your attendance at the board meeting tomorrow. I also wanted to inform you that Dr. Kowalski from Poland has replied to our inquiry and is available to see Matthew next month." "Schedule the appointment," Anthony replied curtly, "and cancel my attendance at the board meeting. Say I have an unavoidable family commitment." "Yes, sir. Any other adjustments to your schedule?" "Tomorrow I want to take Matthew to Regent's Park. Clear my entire morning." Richard sounded surprised on the other end of the line. "Sir, you rarely take Matthew out during the week. Perhaps that's the problem." "Richard," Anthony replied, looking at the photograph on the wall. Louise and Matthew all smiling, on a beach on the Kent coast. An image from a past that seemed to belong to another life. The next morning the air was surprisingly clear for London. Anthony personally chose his son's clothes, dismissing Celeste's help, who watched the change in routine with curiosity. "Are you sure you don't want me to accompany you?" she asked, concerned. "Today it will be just Matthew and me," Anthony replied as he helped his son put on his trainers. "I need to make up for lost time." Regent's Park was quiet for a Wednesday. Anthony held Matthew's hand firmly, guiding him along the tree-lined paths. The boy walked in silence, his face expressionless, as if he were merely fulfilling an obligation. "Can you smell the trees, son? And hear the birds? The park is beautiful today." "Describe it to me," Matthew asked, his voice still distant, but with a faint note of curiosity Anthony hadn't heard in months. "Well, we're on an avenue of London plane trees. It's not their season to flower, but their leaves are a deep green. There are birds, blackbirds, I think, singing in the branches. The sky is blue with hardly any clouds. People are jogging, others are cycling, some are just sitting, reading or talking." "What was it like when we used to come with Mum?" Matthew asked suddenly. The question caught Anthony off guard. Matthew rarely mentioned Louise. "Your mother loved to bring bread to feed the ducks in the lake. You used to run so much, she could barely keep up with you. I was usually lagging behind, taking work calls. She always told me off for that." "I remember," Matthew said. "She said you lived on your phone." Anthony smiled sadly. "She was right, as always." They continued walking until they reached a bench near the lake. They sat down and Anthony noticed that Matthew seemed more relaxed now. "Dad," the boy said after a few minutes of silence, "do you think I'll ever be able to see again?" The question hit Anthony like a punch to the gut. It was the first time Matthew had expressed any hope in years. "I believe so, son. Medicine is advancing every day. We're consulting the best specialists in the world. Sooner or later we'll find a solution." Matthew nodded slightly and fell silent again. Anthony felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this outing was finally breaking through the barriers his son had built around himself. The moment was interrupted by a nearby noise. A football rolled to their feet, followed by a girl running to retrieve it. "Sorry, mister," she said, stopping in front of them. Her voice was steady, despite her apparent shyness. The ball got away. Anthony picked up the ball and handed it to the girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 and wore simple clothes worn from use. Her curly hair was tied in a messy ponytail, and her feet were in scuffed rubber sandals. "It's all right," Anthony replied with a polite smile. "Accidents happen." The girl took the ball, but instead of leaving immediately, she looked curiously at Matthew. "Hi," she said. "My name's Victoria. What's yours?" Matthew turned towards the voice, his expression showing surprise at the unexpected contact. "Matthew," he replied, almost in a whisper, "do you want to play football with me?" Victoria asked, with the naturalness peculiar to children. Anthony quickly intervened. "My son can't play, he can't see." Victoria seemed to consider this for a moment, then shrugged. "So what? We can play a different way." The response took both Anthony and Matthew by surprise. The businessman was used to people reacting to his son's blindness with pity, discomfort, or embarrassment, never with such simple, direct acceptance. "How?" Matthew asked, now genuinely interested. "Well, I could tie a bell to the ball so you can hear where it is. My gran used to do that to play with my uncle, who couldn't see either." Anthony watched his son smile for the first time in months. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there. "I don't have a bell," Victoria said thoughtfully, "but I can fetch the ball and tell you where it is. So, are you in?" Before Anthony could intervene, Matthew was already standing up. "I'm in." "Matthew, I don't know if that's a good idea," Anthony said, worried. "You could get hurt." "Please, Dad," Matthew pleaded with an excitement Anthony hadn't seen in years. "Just for a little while." Reluctantly, the businessman agreed. "All right, but I'm staying close." Victoria took Matthew's hand with disarming naturalness and led him to a grassy area nearby. Anthony followed them, watching closely as the girl explained the game to his son. "I'll roll the ball very slowly towards you and say go. When you hear it, try to kick it. If you miss, no problem, we'll try again." To Anthony's surprise, the game worked. Matthew missed the first few attempts, but soon he started hitting the ball, guided by Victoria's voice. Each time he succeeded, his face lit up with a smile that melted away years of distance. "You're really good at this," Victoria exclaimed with each of Matthew's successful kicks. Anthony watched the scene, fascinated by how this simple girl, who clearly came from a very different reality than his own, could connect with Matthew in a way none of the expensive specialists had managed. after almost an hour of playing. Anthony checked his watch and decided it was time to go back. Matthew was breathless, his cheeks flushed from the effort, but his face showed a joy his father hadn't seen since before the accident. "We have to go, son. You have an appointment with Dr. Stevens this afternoon." Matthew made a face but didn't protest. He turned in the direction where he thought Victoria was. "Thanks for the game." "You're welcome," the girl replied, smiling. "I come here almost every day. If you want to play again—" "Perhaps another day," Anthony interrupted politely. He took his wallet from his pocket and offered the girl a few notes. "Thank you for playing with my son." Victoria looked at the money and then at Anthony, with an expression that mixed surprise and something that looked like disapproval. "You don't have to pay me, mister. I played with him because I wanted to, not for money." She waved goodbye to Matthew, a wave he couldn't see, and ran back to where a group of children were playing football, leaving Anthony with the note still in his hand, feeling strangely disconcerted. On the way back to the car, Matthew seemed different. There was an energy in his steps that Anthony hadn't seen in a long time. "I liked her," the boy said suddenly. "She didn't feel sorry for me." The words hit Anthony like a revelation. It was true. Everyone, including himself, treated Matthew with a compassion that bordered on pity, as if the boy were incapable, fragile, broken. Everyone, except that simple girl who saw in his son just another child to play with. When they arrived home, Celeste met them at the door, surprised to see Matthew's state: creased clothes, grass-stained trainers, a sweaty face, and a smile she hadn't seen in years. "What happened?" she asked, as she helped the boy take off his shoes. "I played football in the park," Matthew answered, excited, "with a girl named Victoria." Celeste looked at Anthony, who just shrugged, equally surprised by the transformation. "And how was it?" the nurse asked, smiling at the boy's animation. "It was amazing. She wasn't afraid to play with me even though I can't see. She said her uncle couldn't see either, but he played all sorts of games." While Celeste took Matthew for a bath, Anthony went to his study, thoughtful. The image of his son smiling while playing with that simple girl wouldn't leave his head. As much as he tried to push the thought away, a question lingered. Was it possible that a streetwise child with no resources or special knowledge could reach his son in a way that all the specialists and expensive treatments had failed to? He sat in his leather armchair, looking at the countless medical reports spread across the desk. Reports that had cost fortunes and had so far brought no concrete results. And then, one afternoon in the park, a strange girl had made his son's smile play feel alive again. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Richard, with news about a new experimental treatment in the United States. Anthony listened to the information, asked a few technical questions, and authorized the necessary procedures to enroll Matthew in the program. But as he spoke, his mind remained in the park, on the image of his son chasing a ball he couldn't see, guided only by the voice of a girl who, unlike everyone else, had not defined him by his disability. When he hung up the phone, Anthony made a decision. Tomorrow, he would take Matthew to the park again. And if Victoria was there, well, perhaps it was worth getting to know this girl who, in one afternoon, had done more for his son than years of expensive treatments. That night, for the first time in a long time, Matthew asked his father to read him a story before bed. Anthony sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the book his son had chosen, a story about a boy who could talk to animals, and began to read. Matthew's voice interrupted him on the third page. "Dad, do you think Victoria will be there tomorrow?" Anthony hesitated. "I don't know, son. She said she comes almost every day, so maybe she will be. Can we go and see?" The businessman smiled in the dark room. "Yes, we can go and see." When he finished the story, Matthew was already asleep. Anthony watched his son's serene face, wondering how a simple afternoon in the park had achieved what years of therapy could not. Perhaps the answer to helping Matthew wasn't in luxurious medical offices or expensive experimental treatments, but in the simplicity of a child who saw his son for who he was, not for what he had lost. Before leaving the room, Anthony kissed his son's forehead and whispered, "We'll go back to the park tomorrow." In the hallway, he found Celeste, who was watching him with an understanding smile. "It's been a long time since I've seen him so excited," she commented. "It's true," Anthony agreed. Who would have thought a simple afternoon in the park, Sometimes the best medicine doesn't come in a bottle. Mr. Edwards, Celeste replied, with the simple wisdom that always characterized her words. Sometimes it comes in the form of friendship. Anthony nodded thoughtfully. Tomorrow we'll go to the park again. I want to see this girl, this Victoria. I want to understand what's so special about her. Celeste smiled. Special isn't always what we think, sir. Sometimes it's just the ability to see the world without the filters we put up. Children are masters at that. That night, for the first time in years, Anthony slept soundly, not woken by the recurring nightmares of the accident. In his dreams, he saw Matthew running through the park, chasing the sound of a ball with a bell, guided by the voice of a girl who, in some mysterious way, was teaching his son to see again, not with his eyes, but with his heart. In the days that followed, Anthony completely rearranged his schedule. Morning meetings were moved to late afternoon, video conferences with international investors rescheduled for the evening. To the astonishment of his team, the businessman who never had time now set aside every morning to take his son to Regent's Park. Richard, his personal assistant for over 10 years, couldn't hide his surprise at the sudden change. Mr. Edwards, the board is questioning your absence from strategic meetings. What should I tell them? Tell them the truth, Richard. I'm dedicating my mornings to my son, Anthony replied while signing some documents in his study. If anyone has a problem with that, they can find another job. For 3 consecutive days, Anthony and Matthew went to the park. For 3 consecutive days, Victoria did not appear. With each passing day, Anthony watched the disappointment grow on his son's face. She must have lied, Matthew said, dejected, as they returned home on the 3rd day. She said she always comes, but she never showed up again. Anthony gently squeezed his son's hand. Maybe something happened, son. We can't judge without knowing. On the 4th day, when they arrived at the park, Anthony had already lost hope. He was ready to suggest they go somewhere else, perhaps to the British Museum, which had just opened an exhibition with audio descriptions, when they heard a familiar voice. Matthew. You came back. Victoria was running towards them, her curly hair bouncing in the wind. She wore the same simple set of clothes from their first meeting, but her smile lit up her whole face. Victoria? Matthew turned towards the voice, his own face lighting up with a smile Anthony rarely saw. You disappeared. We came every day and you weren't here. The girl stopped in front of them, slightly out of breath. I'm sorry. My gran wasn't feeling well. I had to stay with her. I have no way of letting you know because I don't have a phone. Anthony observed the interaction between the 2 children, noticing how Matthew instantly seemed more alive, more present. It was as if a switch had been flicked inside him. Is your gran better? Matthew asked, genuinely concerned. Victoria nodded, then realized the boy couldn't see her gesture. Yes, she is. She's getting on a bit, gets tired sometimes. But she woke up feeling better today and said I could come out to play for a while. Do you live with your grandmother? Anthony asked, curious about the life of this girl who had impacted his son so much. Yes, sir. On the Millwall estate near here. It's just me and her. Anthony knew of the estate, one of the largest social housing projects in East London, just a few miles from the luxurious apartment where he lived with Matthew. 2 worlds separated by a distance that went far beyond physical miles. And your parents, Anthony continued, immediately realizing he had touched a sensitive point when the girl's smile faded. My mum left when I was little. My dad? Well, we don't know where he is. Matthew, sensitive to the change in Victoria's tone, quickly changed the subject. Did you bring the ball today? The smile immediately returned to the girl's face. I did, and I have a surprise. She pulled a small bell from her worn backpack. I borrowed it from my teacher. We can tie it to the ball so you can hear where it is. Anthony watched, impressed, as Victoria skillfully tied the small bell to the ball with a piece of string. The girl showed a sensitivity and practical intelligence that contrasted with her apparent simplicity. There. Now it'll be easier, she said, handing the ball to Matthew. Shake it so you can hear the sound. The boy shook the ball, smiling as he heard the jingle of the bell. Amazing! Shall we play? Victoria invited, already taking Matthew by the hand and guiding him to the lawn. Anthony followed them, sitting on a nearby bench where he could watch them. For the next hour, he saw his son transform. Matthew ran after the ball, guided by the sound of the bell and Victoria's directions. He fell, got up, laughed like he hadn't in years. Your son looks happy. Anthony turned, surprised by the voice beside him. An elderly woman had sat down on the same bench, watching the children with a serene smile. "Yes, he," replied, turning back to look at Matthew. "Happier than he's been in a long time." "Is the girl your daughter too?" the woman asked. No. We just met her. She made friends with my son." The woman nodded, understanding. "Victoria has that gift. She makes friends with everyone. A pure heart, you know." Anthony looked at the elderly woman with renewed interest. "You know her?" "Of course I do. I'm Mrs. Adelaide, her teacher at the community school. I'm officially retired, but I still give extra lessons to the children from the estate. Victoria is one of my best students. Smart, dedicated. Pity life doesn't give her more opportunities." Anthony felt a growing curiosity. This girl, from such a different background, had achieved in a few minutes what years of expensive therapies had not, making his son smile, play, feel normal. She mentioned she lives with her grandmother. Mrs. Adelaide sighed. "Mrs. June, a warrior. She's been raising her granddaughter alone since her daughter abandoned the family. Works as a cleaner when her health allows. It's not easy, but those two have a strength that many people with money don't have." The elderly woman's words echoed in Anthony's mind as he watched Victoria and Matthew play. The girl had infinite patience, constantly adjusting the game so Matthew could fully participate, enthusiastically celebrating each of the boys' small successes. When the sun began to get stronger, Anthony called his son. "Matthew, it's time to go. You have an appointment with the physiotherapist." The boy made a face but didn't protest. He turned towards Victoria. "I have to go. Will you be here tomorrow?" "I'll try," she replied. "But tomorrow I have to help my gran with some sewing she does. Maybe I can only come later." "Later when?" Matthew asked anxiously. "After lunch, around 2 o'clock, I think." Anthony intervened. "We can come in the afternoon tomorrow, that's no problem." Matthew smiled, excited. "It's a date, then." "Tomorrow afternoon?" Victoria nodded, then remembered again that Matthew couldn't see her. "It's a date. I'll bring the ball with the bell again." As they said their goodbyes, Anthony was surprised to realize that he too was looking forward to the next day's meeting. There was something about this simple girl that intrigued him deeply. On the way home, Matthew couldn't stop talking about Victoria, about how funny and smart she was, how she had incredible ideas for games. Anthony listened attentively, amazed at the change in his son. In just 2 meetings with this girl, Matthew had spoken more than in the last 3 years. "Dad," the boy said suddenly, "do you think Victoria could come over to our house one day?" The question took Anthony by surprise. "To our house? Why?" "To play. Some days it rains or it's too hot. And I wanted to show her my Braille books, my adapted games." Anthony hesitated. The idea of bringing a girl from the estate to his luxury apartment in the Barbican seemed at the very least strange. What would his neighbors think? What would the building staff say? And there was also the issue of security. He didn't know this girl, knew nothing about her family beyond the little Mrs. Adelaide had told him. "We'll see, son. First, we need to get to know her better." Matthew seemed to accept the answer, but Anthony noticed a slight disappointment on his face. He felt guilty for it, but also responsible. It was his duty to protect his son, and that meant being cautious about who he allowed into their lives. When they arrived at the apartment, Celeste greeted them with lunch ready. While they ate, Matthew couldn't stop telling the nurse about the game with the ball and the bell, about how Victoria had invented a way for him to play even without seeing. "She seems like a very special girl," Celeste commented, smiling at Anthony across the table. "She is!" Matthew exclaimed. "Did you know she lost her mum, just like me? And she doesn't know where her dad is either." Anthony watched his son, surprised. He didn't remember Victoria mentioning that detail about her father during their conversation. The two must have talked more while they were playing. "Her teacher, Mrs. Adelaide, was in the park," Anthony commented. "She said Victoria is very smart, one of her best students." "She told me she loves to read," Matthew said. "She reads every book she can borrow from the community library, especially adventure and mystery stories." After lunch, Matthew went to his physiotherapy session, and Anthony returned to his study to catch up on accumulated work. He tried to focus on financial reports, on expansion projects for the hospital network, but his mind kept returning to the scene in the park. His son running, smiling, living. In the late afternoon, he received a visit from Paula Evans, director of the Ophthalmology Institute and a longtime friend. Paula had been one of the first doctors to treat Matthew after the accident and had been closely following the case ever since. The results of the latest tests aren't much different from the previous ones. "Anthony," she said after examining Matthew, "I don't see any significant changes in the structure of the optic nerve. And the treatment in Switzerland? What do you think?" Paula sighed. "Honestly, I think the chances are minimal. We've tried similar approaches without success." Anthony felt frustration growing inside him. There must be something we can do. Some new research, some experimental treatment. Money is no object. I know that, Anthony, and we've tried everything science has to offer. But sometimes, she hesitated, sometimes we need to accept that there are limits to what we can do. "I can't accept that," he replied, his voice harsher than he intended. "Not when it comes to my son." Paula placed a hand on his shoulder. "I understand. We'll keep trying, of course, but in the meantime, it's important that Matthew has a good quality of life, that he adapts to his condition, that he learns to be happy despite the limitations." The doctor's words echoed in Anthony's head long after she left. To be happy despite the limitations. Wasn't that exactly what Victoria was helping Matthew do? The girl wasn't trying to cure or fix his son. She simply accepted him as he was and found ways to include him. That night, while reading a story to Matthew before bed, Anthony noticed a subtle change in his son. The boy seemed more relaxed, more present, less consumed by the bitterness that had become his dominant characteristic after the accident. "Dad," Matthew said when Anthony finished the story, "do you think Victoria will really be there tomorrow?" "I hope so, son. She seems to really like you." "I like her too. She treats me like I'm normal, you know. She doesn't feel sorry for me or talk slowly as if I'm stupid." Anthony felt a pang in his chest. It was true. Many people, including himself at times, treated Matthew as if the blindness had affected his cognitive ability, speaking more slowly, explaining obvious things, using a tone of voice that bordered on condescension. "She really is special," Anthony agreed. "A very smart and sensitive girl. Dad, I had an idea. What if we bought her a mobile phone? That way when she can't come, she can let us know and we won't be left waiting." The suggestion caught Anthony by surprise. It was a practical idea, yes, but it also meant a greater commitment to this friendship, a formalization of the contact between them. Part of him wanted to say no immediately, to set boundaries, to maintain control of the situation, but another part, the part that had seen his son smile and play like he hadn't in years, hesitated. "We'll see, son. First, we need to get to know Victoria and her grandmother better. We can't just give a phone to a child without talking to her guardian." Matthew seemed to accept the answer. "You're right. Tomorrow I'll ask if we can meet her gran." Anthony nodded, although the idea of visiting a deprived estate made him uncomfortable. "Good night, son. Sleep well." "Good night, Dad." When he left the room, Anthony found Celeste in the hallway. The nurse was smiling as if she knew something he didn't. "What is it?" Anthony asked, intrigued. "Nothing, Mr. Edwards. I'm just happy to see Matthew so animated again. This girl, this Victoria, seems to have worked a miracle." Anthony reflected on Celeste's words as he walked to his study. Miracle. It was a strong word, laden with meanings that a rational man like him tended to reject. However, what was happening with Matthew did seem to defy logic. 3 years of expensive therapies, renowned doctors, experimental treatments. Nothing had made the boy smile like this simple streetwise girl had in just 2 meetings. Sitting in his leather armchair, Anthony picked up the phone and called Richard, his assistant. "I need you to do some discreet research for me," he said. "I want information on a woman named June, who lives on the Millwall estate with her granddaughter Victoria. I don't know the surname. The granddaughter should be about 9 years old, studies at a community school where a teacher named Adelaide gives lessons. I want to know everything. Financial situation, background, living conditions, family history, but with absolute discretion." "Understood, sir," Richard replied. "Any specific deadline?" "As soon as possible." "And Richard, this stays between us." After hanging up, Anthony gazed at the city through the huge windows of his apartment. Out there, somewhere among the illuminated buildings, a girl named Victoria was sleeping, probably unaware of the impact she was having on the life of a blind boy and his desperate father. The next morning, Anthony received Richard's report while having breakfast. The story of June and Victoria was both common and moving. June Smith, 67, worked as a cleaner in private homes until health problems forced her to reduce her workload. Now she supplemented her small pension by doing sewing and small repairs. She had been raising her granddaughter, Victoria Smith, 9, since her daughter, Angela, had abandoned the family 5 years earlier, addicted to drugs. Victoria's father was unknown. Angela never revealed his identity. They lived in a small flat on the Millwall estate, in precarious but dignified conditions. Victoria attended the local state school, and in the afternoons the community school where she received extra tuition. She was, according to school records, an exemplary student with above-average grades. There was nothing alarming in the report, no criminal record, no association with illicit activities. Just the story of a grandmother struggling to raise her granddaughter amidst the hardships imposed by poverty. Anthony felt slightly guilty for having investigated the family's life, but also relieved by the results. Perhaps the friendship between Matthew and Victoria was not as problematic as he had initially feared. When it was time to go to the park, Matthew was anxious. He had carefully chosen his clothes, something he never did, and asked Celeste to comb his hair properly. "Do I look nice, Dad?" he asked as they went down in the lift. Anthony smiled, surprised and moved by the question. How long had it been since Matthew cared about his appearance? "You look very smart, son." They arrived at the park precisely at 2 o'clock as arranged. Anthony guided Matthew to the same spot where they had met Victoria on the previous days, and they sat down to wait. 15 minutes passed. 30 minutes, an hour. Victoria did not appear. Matthew, who had started the wait excited and talkative, became increasingly silent and dejected. Anthony felt his heart tighten with every passing minute, watching the disappointment grow on his son's face. "She must be running late, son. Maybe her gran needed help with the sewing, like she said. Or maybe she lied," Matthew replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe she doesn't want to play with me anymore." "I don't think that's it, Matthew. She seemed to really like you." "You don't understand, Dad. It's always like this. People feel sorry for me at first, try to be nice, but then they get tired. Nobody wants to be around a blind boy." Matthew's words hit Anthony like a punch to the gut. Was that what his son thought? That people only approached him out of pity? "That's not true, son. Many people like you for who you are, not because of your condition." And Victoria seemed sincere. Something must have happened. But Matthew had already closed himself off again. His face, which in recent days had lit up with smiles, returned to the closed, bitter expression Anthony knew so well. "Let's go home," the boy said, standing up. "I don't want to stay here anymore." With a heavy heart, Anthony took his son back home. Throughout the journey, Matthew remained silent. His face turned towards the window, as if he could see the urban landscape passing by. Celeste met them at the door, her smile vanishing when she saw Matthew's expression. "What happened?" she asked, worried. "Victoria didn't show up," Anthony replied. As Matthew walked straight past them, moving with the confidence of someone who knows the apartment so well, towards his room. "She didn't come?" Celeste seemed genuinely surprised. "How strange. She seemed so enthusiastic about the friendship." "I know. I don't understand what could have happened." Matthew refused to leave his room for the rest of the day. He refused snacks, refused dinner. When Anthony went to check on him before bed, he found him sitting on the bed, his fingers tracing the pages of a Braille book, but not really reading. "Son, you need to eat something." "I'm not hungry, but Matthew, please. We can't let one missed meeting destroy all the progress you've made." The boy turned his face towards his father's voice. "What progress, Dad? I'm still blind. I'm still alone. Nothing has changed." Anthony sat on the edge of the bed, feeling helpless in the face of his son's pain. How could he explain to a 7-year-old child that life is made of missed connections and disappointments, that people don't always do what they promise, that sometimes circumstances beyond our control interfere with our plans? "We'll go back to the park tomorrow," he said finally. "If Victoria doesn't show up, we can try to find her. We know she lives on the Millwall estate with her grandmother." Matthew seemed to consider the idea. "You'd do that? You'd go there to look for her?" The question caught Anthony by surprise. Enter a deprived estate looking for a girl they barely knew. The idea seemed absurd. However, Looking at his son's hopeful face, he realized he would do anything to keep him happy. If we have to, yes, we'll do that. A small smile appeared on Matthew's face. Thanks, Dad. Anthony kissed his son's forehead and left the room, finding Celeste in the hallway. He agreed to go to the park tomorrow, he said. If Victoria doesn't show up, we'll have to try and find her on the estate. Celeste nodded, understanding. I think that's a good idea, sir. This girl clearly means a lot to Matthew. It's worth the effort. Anthony agreed, although the idea of venturing into a deprived estate still made him uncomfortable. However, for the first time in years, he felt there was a way to truly help his son, not through expensive treatments or renowned specialists, but through the simple friendship of a girl who saw Matthew not as a problem to be solved, but as a child to be accepted. That night, before sleeping, Anthony found himself doing something he hadn't done in a long time, praying. He was not a religious man. Science and rationality had always guided his life. But at that moment, he felt compelled to ask some higher power for Victoria to show up the next day, for that connection that had awakened his son not to be lost as quickly as it had appeared. Please, he whispered in the darkness of his room, let her be there. My son needs her. The day dawned overcast in London, as if the sky reflected Anthony's state of mind. He had spent a sleepless night, alternating between worrying about his son and frustration at finding himself in this situation. A powerful businessman, used to controlling every aspect of his life, now anxious about the appearance of a streetwise girl he barely knew. Matthew woke up early, more cheerful than Anthony had expected. During breakfast, the boy even agreed to take his medicine without protest, something that hadn't happened in weeks. Dad, if Victoria isn't at the park today, are we really going to look for her on the estate? He asked while Celeste helped him get dressed. Yes, son, we are. But I'm sure she'll be there today. Something must have happened yesterday that prevented her from coming. Matthew nodded, his face showing a confidence Anthony didn't feel. The businessman had instructed Richard to continue his discreet investigation, trying to find out more details about the whereabouts of Victoria and her grandmother, but so far there was no news. They arrived at the park punctually at 10 o'clock. The sky remained overcast, threatening rain, and there were fewer people than usual. Anthony guided Matthew to their usual spot, and they sat down to wait. What's the sky like today, Dad? Matthew asked suddenly. It's cloudy, grey. I think it's going to rain later. I like rainy days, the boy commented. The smell is different, and the sound. The sound of the rain falling is beautiful. Anthony looked at his son, surprised. Matthew rarely spoke about his sensory perceptions, about how he experienced the world through the senses he had left. It was as if, since the accident, he had closed himself off not only to the outside world, but also to his own sensations. That's true, Anthony agreed. The sound of the rain is very beautiful. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Then, Matthew turned suddenly as if he had heard something. Someone's coming, he said. Anthony looked in the direction his son indicated and saw a familiar figure running towards them. It was Victoria, but she wasn't alone. An elderly woman with grey hair and a slightly stooped posture walked a few steps behind her. Matthew! Mr. Anthony! Victoria shouted, waving excitedly as she approached. Matthew's face lit up as he recognized his friend's voice. Victoria! You came! The girl stopped in front of them, out of breath. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her hair was arranged in 2 neat braids. I'm sorry about yesterday. My gran wasn't feeling well. I couldn't leave the house. It's okay, Matthew replied, relief evident in his voice. I understand. Anthony stood up, extending his hand to the approaching woman. Good morning. You must be Victoria's grandmother. The elderly woman shook his hand with surprising firmness. Mrs. June Smith at your service. I came to meet you and your son since Victoria can't stop talking about you. There was a dignity in Mrs. June's posture that impressed Anthony. Despite her simple clothes and the clear signs of a life of hard work, she carried herself with a pride reminiscent of the matriarchs of traditional families. Anthony Edwards, he introduced himself. And this is my son, Matthew. A pleasure to meet you, Matthew, Mrs. June said, bending slightly to be at the boy's level. Victoria told me you've been having a lot of fun together. Yes, ma'am, Matthew replied politely. Victoria is very nice. While the children moved away to play, Victoria had brought the ball with the bell again. Anthony and Mrs. June sat on the bench to talk. Thank you for coming, Mrs. June. I must confess I was worried when Victoria didn't show up yesterday. Matthew was quite upset. The elderly woman nodded, understanding. I apologize for that. I had a bout of high blood pressure. I couldn't let Victoria go out alone. Unfortunately, we have no way of letting you know. A telephone is a luxury we can't afford. I understand perfectly, Anthony replied, watching the children play in the distance. Your nephew also had vision problems, from what Victoria mentioned. Yes, my Jacob, Mrs. June replied, a sad smile appearing on her wrinkled face. He was Angela's brother, Victoria's mother. He lost his sight as a baby due to poorly treated meningitis. But he was a smart boy, full of life. Victoria was very attached to him. Was? Anthony asked, noticing the use of the past tense. Mrs. June's face darkened. Jacob left us 5 years ago. Pneumonia that we couldn't treat in time. The local clinic was without a doctor. The medicine was expensive. By the time we got him to the hospital, it was too late. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. The story was painfully common in London's poorer boroughs, people dying for lack of access to basic health services, due to public sector negligence, for lack of money to buy medicine. I'm very sorry, he said. Genuinely. Life goes on, Mrs. June replied, with the resigned wisdom of one who has faced many losses. Jacob was 15 when he passed. Victoria was only 4, but the two were inseparable. She was the one who started inventing games to include her uncle. Since she was little, this girl has had a huge heart. Anthony looked at the lawn where Victoria guided Matthew with infinite patience, teaching him to follow the sound of the bell tied to the ball. Now he understood where the girl's extraordinary sensitivity came from. She had learned from a very young age to see beyond physical limitations. She really is special, he commented. She achieved something that no doctor or therapist has managed in 3 years, making my son smile again. Mrs. June followed his gaze, watching the children tenderly. Sometimes the best medicines don't come in bottles, Mr. Edwards. They come from the heart. The words echoed Celeste's, and Anthony felt a strange discomfort. He who had always believed in the power of science, of medicine, of money, now found himself confronted with the possibility that the solution to his son's suffering lay in something as simple as the friendship of a poor girl. I must confess, Mrs. June, that I was a little apprehensive when Matthew started getting close to Victoria. Not because of her specifically, but because I didn't know you. The elderly woman smiled, understanding. It's natural, Mr. Edwards. You're a father. You want to protect your son. I would do the same. That's why I wanted to come today, to meet you in person. Victoria has talked so much about Matthew that I had to see for myself. And what do you think? Anthony asked, curious. I think it's the beginning of a beautiful friendship, she replied simply. Victoria doesn't have many friends her own age. The children on the estate are tougher, you know. The hard life makes them that way. Matthew is different. He's gentle, polite. Victoria feels comfortable with him. Anthony nodded, understanding. In a way, both children were outsiders in their own worlds. Matthew isolated by his blindness, Victoria by her unusual sensitivity. Mrs. June, I would like to invite Victoria to our house one day. Matthew has several adapted games, braille books, things they could enjoy together. Of course, if you allow it. The elderly woman seemed surprised by the invitation. Well, I don't see a problem as long as I know where she'll be and with whom. But I must confess I'm a bit worried. You live in a very posh neighborhood, don't you? I don't know if Victoria would feel comfortable. I'm sure she would adapt well, Anthony replied. And if you prefer, you can accompany her, of course. Mrs. June considered the proposal for a moment. Let's do this. Next time I'll bring Victoria to the park and we can talk more about it. I need to get to know you better first, Mr. Edwards. I hope you understand. Anthony nodded, respecting the elderly woman's caution. It was natural that she wanted to protect her granddaughter, just as he wanted to protect Matthew. As they talked, thick drops of rain began to fall. In seconds, what was a light drizzle turned into a summer storm, typical of London. Children? Anthony called, standing up. Come on, it's raining heavily. Victoria immediately took Matthew by the hand, guiding him carefully back to where the adults were. Both were soaked, but they were laughing, as if the rain were part of the game. We need to go, Victoria, Mrs. June said, worried. The rain is going to get worse, and we have a long way home. Anthony looked at the elderly woman, at her soaked granddaughter, and made an impulsive decision. "I can give you a lift home. My car is nearby with a driver." Mrs. June hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the offer. "We don't want to be a bother, Mr. Edwards. It's no bother at all. It would be irresponsible of me to let you walk in this storm." After some more insistence, Mrs. June finally accepted. The four of them ran to the park's car park, where Anthony's driver was waiting in the luxurious armored BMW. When they reached the car, Victoria stopped, open-mouthed. "Wow, what a nice car. It looks like something from a movie." Matthew smiled, proud. "It's my dad's. It even has a TV inside." The driver opened the back door and they all got in, Mrs. June visibly embarrassed to be wetting the leather upholstery. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "The Millwall estate," Anthony replied. "Mrs. June will direct us." During the journey, Victoria couldn't stop talking, pointing out everything she saw through the window, describing every detail to Matthew, who smiled. Enchanted by his friend's enthusiasm, "There's a man selling cotton candy. And over there, a huge dog. It looks like a wolf, but it must be just a very big German shepherd. And look, we're going under a flyover now." Anthony observed the interaction between the children, amazed. Victoria had naturally become Matthew's eyes, describing the outside world in a way no adult could, with the simplicity and wonder of childhood. As they approached the estate, the urban landscape changed drastically. The imposing buildings gave way to precarious constructions. The well-paved streets turned into narrow, potholed alleys. The driver slowed down, clearly nervous about entering an area considered dangerous with such a conspicuous car. "It's just up ahead. After that corner shop," Mrs. June directed, pointing to a small makeshift grocery store. "You can stop right here, Mr. Edwards. The car can't go down the alley." When the car stopped, Anthony made another impulsive decision. "I'd like to see where you live, if it's not an inconvenience. May I walk you there?" The question took everyone by surprise, including Anthony himself. It was not in his nature to step out of his comfort zone, let alone venture into a deprived estate in the middle of a storm. Mrs. June seemed to assess the sincerity of the request before answering. "If you really want to see our reality, you're welcome. But I must warn you, it's very different from what you're used to." "I'm sure it is," Anthony replied, "but I think it's important to see the environment where Victoria lives, since she and Matthew are becoming friends." "Let's go, Dad," Matthew exclaimed, excited. "I want to see Victoria's house." So the four of them got out of the car, Anthony instructing the driver to wait and ignoring his worried look. The rain had eased a little, but it was still falling hard enough to soak them again in seconds. They followed Mrs. June down a narrow alley, where rainwater ran like a small river, carrying rubbish and debris. Anthony held Matthew's hand firmly, guiding him carefully to avoid puddles and obstacles. "Mind your head here." "Mr. Edwards," Mrs. June warned as they entered a particularly narrow passage, where illegal electricity wires hung dangerously low. After a few minutes' walk, they arrived at a small unfinished brick building. It was a simple house with unplastered walls and an asbestos roof, but surprisingly clean and organized considering the surroundings. "This is where we live," Mrs. June said, opening the door. "It's simple, but it's our home." Anthony and Matthew entered the small living room, which also served as a kitchen and sewing area. An old but well-kept sofa occupied one wall, while a table with an old sewing machine dominated the other side of the room. There were colorful fabrics organized in piles, threads of different thicknesses in recycled glass jars, and to Anthony's surprise, several meticulously crafted rag dolls. "Do you make these dolls?" he asked, picking one up to examine it. It was detailed work with an impeccable finish. "Yes, sir. They're my livelihood. Besides the sewing I do, I sell them at craft fairs when I can get to them." "They're beautiful," Anthony commented, genuinely impressed with the quality of the work. "Come on, Matthew," Victoria called, pulling her friend by the hand. "I want to show you my books." The children went to the other room of the house, leaving the adults alone. "Would you like a coffee, Mr. Edwards?" Mrs. June offered, already heading to the small stove in the corner of the living room, the kitchen. "It's not imported like what you must be used to, but it's made with care." "Yes, please." "Thank you." While the elderly woman prepared the coffee, Anthony observed his surroundings. Despite the evident material poverty, there was an atmosphere of dignity in that small space. Everything was clean, organized, well cared for. The few photographs on the wall, in simple, probably handmade frames, showed Victoria at different ages, always smiling, some with an older boy who must have been Jacob, the blind uncle, your nephew Jacob. Anthony asked, pointing to one of the photos. Yes, Mrs. June replied with a melancholy smile. He was a special boy. Very smart despite his limitations. Victoria adored him. May I ask, what happened to her mother? Mrs. June sighed, serving the coffee in simple but beautiful ceramic mugs. Angela was always a difficult girl. After Jacob passed, she rebelled, started hanging out with the wrong crowd, using drugs. She got pregnant with Victoria at 16, wouldn't say who the father was. I tried to help her, but the drugs had already taken over. When Victoria turned 4, Angela disappeared. They say she went to Manchester with a dealer, but I was never sure. Anthony nodded, moved by the story. It was a cruel portrait of the reality of many British families. Drugs, abandonment, responsibilities prematurely transferred to the elderly. And you've been raising Victoria alone ever since? Yes, it's not easy at my age with my health problems, but God never abandons us. And Victoria is a blessing, studious, obedient, affectionate. She's worth any sacrifice. Anthony tasted the coffee. It was really good, strong and aromatic, just as he liked it. You make excellent coffee, Mrs. June. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. The small pleasures in life, aren't they? From the other room, they could hear the children's laughter. It was a pure, genuine sound that transcended social differences and physical limitations. Your son is a very polite boy, Mrs. June commented. Victoria told me about the accident, about his mother. A tragedy. Yes, Anthony replied, the pain still present even after 3 years. It was a car accident. A lorry lost its brakes on a hill. Louise died instantly. Matthew lost his sight because of glass shards that hit his eyes. The doctors did their best, but... I'm very sorry, Mrs. June said sincerely. Losing someone we love is always difficult. But your son is lucky to have a father who loves him so much, who does everything for him. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. Did he really do everything for his son? Or just what his money and his limited worldview allowed? Perhaps he had spent the last 3 years trying to fix Matthew, when what the boy really needed was acceptance, genuine human connection. Mrs. June, I want to make a proposal. I don't know if you'll accept, but I ask you to consider it. I would like to hire you to do some sewing for me. I have several suits that need altering, shirts that need minor repairs, and I would also like to buy some of these dolls for donation to the children's hospital in my network. The elderly woman looked at him suspiciously. Mr. Edwards, I appreciate the offer, but I don't need charity. It's not charity, Mrs. June, it's work. You clearly have talent and I have real needs. As for the dolls, we really do make regular donations to the children's hospital. The children would be delighted with such well-made items. Mrs. June seemed to be assessing the sincerity of the proposal. You own hospitals? Yes, I have a network of private hospitals in London and other cities. It's been the family business for 2 generations. I see, she replied thoughtfully. Well, if it's real work, I don't see why I should refuse. But we must agree on fair prices, not too high to exploit you, nor too low to exploit me. Anthony smiled, admiring the dignity of this woman, who, despite all her difficulties, refused to be treated with condescension. Agreed, and there's one more thing. Matthew mentioned it would be good if Victoria had a mobile phone, to let us know when she can't make it to the park. I would like to give her one if you'll allow it. This time Mrs. June frowned. A mobile phone is a very expensive gift, Mr. Edwards. I don't know if it would be appropriate. I understand your concern, but think of it as something practical that would benefit both Victoria and Matthew. And also you, as you could contact your granddaughter when needed. The elderly woman sighed, as if fighting an internal battle between pride and pragmatism. I'll think about it. I can't give you an answer right now. Of course, no rush, Anthony replied. Take your time. At that moment, Victoria and Matthew returned to the room, both excited. Dad, Victoria has a book that tells the story of a blind boy who can see the world through sounds. She read a bit of it to me. It's one of the books I borrowed from the community library, Victoria explained. It's called The World Through Peter's Ears. It's really cool. It sounds fascinating, Anthony commented, genuinely interested, and I told her about my Braille books, about how I read with my fingers, Matthew continued. Victoria said she wants to learn Braille too, to read along with me. Anthony felt his heart warm at his son's enthusiasm. an enthusiasm he hadn't seen since before the accident. It was as if a light had been rekindled inside him, a light that all the medical treatments and expensive therapies had failed to ignite. "That would be wonderful," he said, looking at Mrs. June. "In fact, we could arrange for Braille lessons for Victoria if she's interested. I have contacts with excellent teachers." "Can I, Gran?" Victoria asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "Imagine! I could read stories to Matthew and he could check if I'm reading it right with his fingers." The elderly woman smiled, unable to resist her granddaughter's enthusiasm. "If Mr. Edwards can really arrange these lessons, and if it's not too much trouble." "Not at all," Anthony replied. "It would be a pleasure." As they discussed the practical details, Anthony couldn't help but notice the irony of life. He who had always valued power, money, status, now found himself sitting in a humble home on a deprived estate, drinking coffee from a simple mug, fascinated by the wisdom of an elderly woman with no material resources and the purity of the friendship between his blind son and a streetwise girl. Perhaps, he thought, the real miracle was not making Matthew see again with his eyes, but helping him see in a completely new way, with his heart. And perhaps, just perhaps, he himself was learning to see the world differently, beyond the limitations of his own privileged and restricted vision. The rain outside had stopped, and a ray of sunshine streamed through the small window of the living room, illuminating the smiling faces of Matthew and Victoria, who were already planning their next adventure together. In the weeks that followed, an unexpected routine established itself in Anthony Edwards's life. 3 times a week, his driver would pick up Victoria and Mrs. June from the Millwall estate and take them to the luxurious apartment in the Barbican. There, Matthew and Victoria would spend the afternoon playing, reading, and more recently, taking Braille lessons together. Anthony had hired Marianne Foster, the most renowned Braille specialist in London, to teach Victoria. To everyone's surprise, the girl learned with impressive speed. "She has a natural talent," Marianne commented after the 3rd lesson. "Her motor coordination, tactile sensitivity, memory skills, they're exceptional." "Victoria has always been very smart," Mrs. June replied proudly, as she sewed one of Anthony's suits in the living room. "At school, the teachers say she could be 2 years ahead." The arrangement between Anthony and Mrs. June worked well for both. She came 3 times a week with her granddaughter, brought her sewing materials, and worked while the children had their activities. Anthony paid her a fair price for the repairs and alterations, and had also commissioned 50 rag dolls for donation to the Children's Hospital in the Edwards network. The mobile phone Anthony had given Victoria, after much insistence and negotiation with Mrs. June, had also proved useful. The girl used it responsibly, only to arrange meetings and to let them know when she couldn't come. To Anthony's surprise, she never asked for games or entertainment apps. Her only request had been for a digital book app, which Anthony promptly installed. That particular afternoon, while Marianne was teaching the children in the study, Anthony was working in his office, trying to concentrate on financial reports. It was becoming increasingly difficult to focus on work. His thoughts constantly drifted to the transformation he was observing in Matthew, and if he were honest with himself, the transformation he felt within himself. A soft knock on the door interrupted his reflections. It was Celeste with a worried expression on her face. "Mr. Edwards, do you have a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." "Of course, Celeste. What is it?" The nurse entered, closing the door behind her. "It's about this situation with Victoria and her grandmother." Anthony frowned, confused. "Is there a problem?" Celeste hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Don't you think you're getting too involved? I mean, bringing people we barely know into our home 3 times a week, giving expensive gifts, hiring private tutors." "Matthew is happy," Anthony replied curtly. "Happier than he's been in years. Isn't that reason enough?" "Of course it is, sir. I'm just concerned. You don't really know who these people are, what they want. What are you suggesting, Celeste?" Anthony's voice dropped to a dangerously low tone. "That Mrs. June and her 9-year-old granddaughter are trying to run some kind of scam on me." "They söker their tiende." Nurse blushed. "Not exactly, sir. But people in vulnerable situations sometimes do things they wouldn't normally do. And you are a very wealthy, very generous man. I think I am perfectly capable of judging people's character, Celeste. Or am I mistaken?" No, sir, of course not. I'm just trying to protect you and Matthew. It's my job. Anthony sighed, softening his tone. I appreciate your concern, truly. But I have been observing Mrs. June and Victoria closely. They are dignified, honest people. In fact, Mrs. June has already refused several of my offers because she considered them charity. I had to convince her they were legitimate work proposals. Celeste nodded, still not entirely convinced. I understand, sir. I just think we should be careful. The attachment Matthew is developing for this girl, if something goes wrong, he will suffer greatly. We all suffer at some point, Celeste. It's part of life. I can't protect Matthew from everything as much as I want to. The conversation was interrupted by laughter coming from the study. Anthony and Celeste exchanged glances. It had been so long since they had heard Matthew laugh like that. Let's see what's going on, Anthony suggested, standing up. In the study, they found Matthew and Victoria sitting side by side, both with their fingers on a sheet with raised dots. Marianne was watching, smiling. What's so funny? Anthony asked, approaching. Dad! Matthew exclaimed, turning towards the voice. Victoria just read her first sentence in Braille. But she mixed up the letters and it came out as something very funny. What was supposed to be the ball is blue came out as the doll is a fool, Victoria explained, laughing. It makes no sense at all. Anthony smiled, infected by the children's joy. That happens when you're learning something new. The important thing is to persist. And she is persisting admirably, Marianne commented. I've never seen anyone progress so quickly in Braille without a real need to use it. It's because I want to read with Matthew, Victoria replied simply. When we finish reading The Little Prince, I'll be able to check if I'm understanding the symbols correctly. Anthony watched the interaction between the children, amazed. It was as if Matthew and Victoria had created their own world, where blindness was not a disability, but just a characteristic, like having curly hair or brown eyes. I think that's enough for today, Marianne said, gathering her materials. You've worked very well. In the next lesson, we'll start with more complex sentences. As the teacher said her goodbyes, Victoria took Matthew's hand. Let's show your dad what we discovered in the bedroom. Yes? The boy agreed, excited. The children led Anthony to Matthew's room, where they had spread several objects on the floor. We're doing a test, Victoria explained, to see if Matthew can identify things just by touch and smell. And how's it going? Anthony asked, curious. Brilliantly, Matthew exclaimed. I've got almost everything right. I only got the remote control wrong. I confused it with the mobile phone. That's fascinating, Anthony commented, genuinely impressed. Victoria says I can learn to see using my other senses, Matthew continued. She told me about her uncle, who could walk through the entire estate without a cane just by paying attention to sounds and smells. Anthony looked at Victoria with renewed interest. This girl, with her simple and intuitive wisdom, was teaching his son things that no expensive specialist had managed. Is that true, Victoria? Your uncle could navigate like that? The girl nodded seriously. Yes, sir. Uncle Jacob used to say that when we lose one sense, the others get stronger to compensate. He could hear things no one else could, smell things no one else noticed. Like rain approaching, Matthew added. Victoria said her uncle knew when it was going to rain hours before, just by the smell of the air. That's incredible, Anthony commented, sitting on the edge of the bed to get a better look at the test the children were doing. And you think you can learn to do that, Matthew? Victoria says I can. She said it's just a matter of practice, of paying attention. That I don't need my eyes to see the world. Something in his son's words deeply touched Anthony. I don't need my eyes to see the world. It was such a simple concept, so obvious in a way, yet it went against everything he had tried to do for the past 3 years. All the treatments, all the therapies, all the consultations with specialists, all aimed at making Matthew see again with his eyes, when perhaps the path was to help him see in other ways. Victoria is absolutely right, he said finally. I think we have a lot to learn from her, and from the wisdom of Uncle Jacob. The girl smiled, the kind of smile that lights up an entire room. Thank you, Mr. Anthony. You can learn to see differently too, you know? The question took Anthony by surprise. What do you mean? It's just that sometimes we see with our eyes, but we don't really see, you know? We look at people, but we don't notice what they're like on the inside. The simplicity and depth of that observation left Anthony momentarily speechless. It was as if this 9-year-old child had just summed up in a few words an entire philosophy of life. "You are very wise for your age, Victoria." The girl shrugged without affectation. "My gran always says that life teaches more than any school, and I've seen a lot on the estate, you know. People who seem good but aren't, and people who seem bad but have a good heart." At that moment, Mrs. June appeared at the bedroom door. "Victoria, it's time to go. I've finished Mr. Edwards's repairs and it's getting late." "Already, Gran?" "We were in the middle of the test." "We can continue tomorrow," Matthew said quickly. "Right, Dad? They're coming tomorrow too, aren't they?" Anthony hesitated. "Tomorrow I have an important board meeting for the hospitals, but I could ask Richard to pick up Victoria and Mrs. June. Celeste will be here to supervise." Mrs. June frowned. "I don't want to be a bother, Mr. Edwards. If you'll be busy, we can leave it for another day." "Not at all," Anthony insisted. "Matthew eagerly awaits these meetings. It wouldn't be fair to deprive him of that because of my professional obligations." After some more insistence, Mrs. June finally agreed. As the children said their goodbyes, Victoria describing in detail the hug she was giving Matthew, as though he could see it through her words, Anthony had a sudden idea. "Mrs. June, I'd like to make a proposal. This weekend, we have a charity event at the Edwards Foundation, an organization I created in my wife's memory. There will be a sensory exhibition designed specifically for visually impaired people. I would like to invite you and Victoria to accompany us." The elderly woman seemed surprised by the invitation. "A charity event? I don't know if that would be appropriate, Mr. Edwards. These events are usually quite sophisticated." "That's precisely why I'd like you to come," Anthony insisted. "Matthew would be delighted, and I'm sure Victoria would be too. The exhibition was designed to be experienced through touch, hearing, smell, all the senses except sight. I think it would be a valuable experience for both children." Mrs. June still seemed hesitant. "And how would it work?" "Would we have to wear special clothes?" "Come as you feel comfortable," Anthony replied. "The important thing is the experience, not the appearance." "Can I go, Gran?" Victoria asked, her eyes pleading. "Please. I've never been to an exhibition." Faced with her granddaughter's enthusiasm, Mrs. June finally gave in. "All right. But I'll need to know more details, time, place, how we'll get there. Richard will pick you up. And as for the clothes, if you'll allow me a suggestion, perhaps we could make a quick visit to a department store beforehand, to choose something that will make you comfortable at the event." Mrs. June's expression immediately hardened. "Mr. Edwards, we've already discussed this. I do not accept charity." Anthony sighed. The woman's dignity was admirable, but sometimes it made things more difficult. "It's not charity, Mrs. June, it's practicality. The event will have photographers, the press. It will be full of London's high society. I know that doesn't matter to you nor to me, frankly, but it could be an awkward situation if you're not dressed appropriately. Think of it as part of the invitation. Just as I offer transport, I also offer appropriate clothing for the occasion." The elderly woman still seemed reluctant, but Victoria intervened. "Gran, we can return the clothes afterwards, can't we, Mr. Anthony? Then it's not a gift, just a loan." Anthony smiled, admiring the girl's intelligence. "Exactly. It's just a loan for a special occasion." This solution seemed to satisfy Mrs. June, who finally agreed. As they said their goodbyes, Anthony couldn't help but notice the sparkle in Victoria's eyes, the excitement of a child who, for the first time in her life, would have the opportunity to experience something completely new. When the driver took Mrs. June and Victoria away, Anthony returned to his study, where he found Celeste waiting for him. "You invited them to the Foundation's event?" she asked, disapproval evident in her voice. "Yes, Celeste. Is there a problem?" The nurse hesitated. "Mr. Edwards, with all due respect, don't you think you're taking this too far? It's one thing to bring the girl here to play with Matthew. It's another thing entirely to introduce them into your social life." Anthony faced Celeste with a coldness he rarely showed. "First, I am not introducing them into my social life. I am taking Matthew to an event that will be beneficial for him and inviting Victoria and Mrs. June to accompany us because I know he will be more comfortable with them present. Second, I don't recall asking for your opinion on my personal decisions, Celeste." The nurse blushed intensely. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep my bounds. I'm just concerned." Anthony's tone softened as he noticed the nurse's genuine discomfort. I understand your concern, Celeste, but I need you to trust my judgment. What's happening with Matthew? This transformation. Here's something I haven't seen in 3 years of treatments and therapies. For the first time since the accident, I have hope that my son can have a full, happy life despite his blindness. And what if he gets disappointed? Celeste asked in a low voice. What if this girl gets tired of him? Or if they disappear from our lives as quickly as they entered? It was a fair question, one that Anthony himself had asked himself numerous times in recent weeks. Then we'll deal with it when it happens, he replied. But I can't deprive Matthew of this friendship, of this growth, out of fear of what may or may not happen in the future. That night during dinner, Matthew couldn't stop talking about the plans for the sensory test he would do with Victoria the next day. She said, we're going to try it with food. I'll have to guess what I'm eating just by the smell and taste. I don't think it will be too hard, but she promised to choose tricky things. Sounds like fun, Anthony commented, observing his son's enthusiasm. Matthew, can I ask you a question? Of course, Dad. What do you think of Victoria? Why do you like her so much? The boy seemed to reflect seriously on the question. She makes me feel normal, Dad. Not like I'm a poor thing or incapable. She invents games that I can play but that are still challenging. And she never ever feels sorry for me. And that's important to you, not being pitied. It's the most important thing, Matthew replied with a conviction surprising for a 7-year-old. Everyone pities the blind boy, even you, Dad. You think I don't notice, but I do. The way you talk to me, as if I were made of glass and could break at any moment. How you lower your voice when you talk about the accident or about Mum. How you watch me when you think I'm not noticing. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. It was true. Everyone treated Matthew with excessive delicacy, born of fear and pity. Everyone except Victoria. Victoria doesn't do that, Matthew continued. She talks to me normally, tells me off when I do something wrong, celebrates when I get it right. She treats me like she would any friend. And you know what else? She believes I can do things, Dad, things I didn't even believe I could. His son's words resonated deeply within Anthony. He realized that in his eagerness to protect Matthew, to spare him any additional suffering, he might have been limiting him more than the blindness itself. Thank you for telling me that, son. It's very important for me to understand how you feel. Matthew smiled, that rare and precious smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. And there's one more thing, Dad. Victoria says everyone has something they can't see. That some can't see with their eyes like me, but many can't see with their hearts, and that's much worse. Anthony blinked, surprised by the depth of that reflection. And do you agree with her? I do. I think before I couldn't see with my heart, Dad. I was too angry, too sad. But now I'm starting to see things I'd never seen before. What things, son? Like how sad you look when you think I'm not watching. How Celeste always hums when she's happy. How the rain has lots of different sounds depending on where it falls. These are things I never paid attention to before. Anthony felt his eyes well up with tears. His son, whom he had thought was trapped in darkness, was actually discovering a new world, rich in sensations and perceptions that many, including himself, would never experience. I think Victoria is right, he said finally. Seeing with the heart is a rare and precious gift. After dinner, when Matthew was already asleep, Anthony sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, contemplating the illuminated city through the windows. The conversation with his son had deeply moved him, forcing him to question many of his convictions. For 3 years, he had obsessively pursued the idea of curing Matthew, of making him see again, as if blindness were a problem to be solved at any cost. Now he realized that perhaps the real challenge was different, not to make Matthew see the world, but to help him experience it in different, equally rich and meaningful ways. And what about himself? How many things could he not see despite having perfect vision? How many times had he judged people like Mrs. June and Victoria by their appearance, their social status, without truly seeing who they were inside? The phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Richard. Mr. Edwards, I'm calling to confirm your attendance at the board meeting tomorrow. I also wanted to inform you that the journalist from the Times magazine has confirmed the interview for the feature on the foundation. She specifically wants to cover the story of how you created the foundation after the incident with your wife and son. Anthony frowned. The Edwards Foundation had been created shortly after the accident, initially as a way to honor Louise and channel his own grief into something constructive. Over time, it had become one of the leading institutions supporting visually impaired people in the country, funding research, offering psychological support to families, and promoting events like the sensory exhibition that would take place this weekend. Tell the journalist I prefer not to discuss the personal aspects. The foundation itself is a sufficient topic. Understood, sir. One more thing, Dr. Evans called. He wants to schedule an urgent appointment for Matthew. He said he received the results of some tests and would like to discuss them in person. Anthony felt his heart race. Did he give any hint as to what he found? No, sir. He just said it was important. Schedule it for the day after tomorrow, then. And Richard, prepare a complete dossier on the Millwall Community School. I want to know everything. Facilities, teaching staff, academic performance, accessibility. The state school near the Millwall estate, sir? Richard sounded surprised. That's the one. And I also want information on scholarship programs in private schools for gifted children from low-income backgrounds. May I ask why, sir? Anthony hesitated. He wasn't ready to share his plans yet, mainly because he wasn't entirely sure what he was doing himself. Just research for a new foundation project. Thank you, Richard. After hanging up, Anthony returned to contemplating the city. Down below, somewhere between the illuminated buildings and the shadows of the estates, a girl named Victoria was probably sleeping, unaware of how she had transformed the life of a blind boy and his desperate father. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to do something for her too, something that could transform her future as profoundly as she had transformed their present. Saturday dawned with a perfectly blue sky, without a single cloud in sight, one of those rare days in London when the pollution takes a break and the sun shines brightly. Anthony watched the city awaken from his penthouse in the Barbican, thoughtful. In a few hours he would be taking Matthew, Victoria, and Mrs. June to the sensory exhibition at the Edwards Foundation, an event that would bring together the most influential of London's high society. The meeting with Dr. Evans the day before still echoed in his mind. The news had not been good. Unfortunately, Anthony, the new tests confirm what we already suspected, the doctor had said, with the gravity the situation required. The damage to the optic nerve is permanent. Even with the advances in science, even with all the available technology, there is no prospect of vision recovery. It wasn't exactly a surprise. Other specialists had given similar diagnoses over the past 3 years, but Anthony had always clung to the hope that a new treatment, a new technique, a new specialist might offer a solution. Now Dr. Evans, the most respected ophthalmologist in the country, was definitively closing that door. Is there really nothing we can do? Anthony had asked, his voice betraying his desperation. The doctor had looked at him with compassion. What we can and must do is help Matthew fully develop his other abilities. He is a brilliant boy, with incredible potential. Blindness does not define who he is, nor does it limit what he can achieve. The doctor's words were almost identical to what Victoria had said weeks before. The simple wisdom of a 9-year-old child coincided with the experience of one of the most renowned doctors in the country. How is Matthew? Dr. Evans had asked. The last time I saw him, he was quite withdrawn, depressed. He's different, Anthony had replied, a small smile forming on his lips. He's made a friend, a girl named Victoria. She has been, well, she's been something of a miracle in our lives. The doctor had smiled, interested. Tell me more about it. And Anthony had told him everything. The meeting in the park, the adapted games, the braille lessons, the sensory tests, Victoria's unusual wisdom. He told him how Matthew was more open, happier, more connected with the world around him. That's wonderful, Anthony, the doctor had replied, genuinely moved. That's exactly what Matthew needs. Not more treatments or experimental procedures, but human connection, acceptance, a way to rediscover the world through his other senses. But I still can't fully accept it, Anthony had confessed. Part of me still wants to fix him. Dr. Evans had placed a hand on his shoulder. Anthony, your son is not broken. Different, yes. Challenged, undoubtedly, but not broken. And from what you tell me, this girl, this Victoria, has already understood that. Perhaps it's time for you to understand it too. Now, hours later, that conversation still reverberated in Anthony's mind as he watched Matthew getting ready for the event, with Celeste's help. The boy was excited, talking non-stop about how he couldn't wait to show the sensory exhibition to Victoria. "She's going to love it, Dad. Especially the sound room where you can feel the music with your whole body." Anthony smiled, moved by his son's enthusiasm. It was the first time since the accident that Matthew had shown genuine interest in going out, in experiencing the world beyond the safe walls of his apartment. "I'm sure she will, son. The exhibition was designed precisely for people like you and Victoria." "What do you mean, people like me and Victoria?" Matthew asked, frowning. "Victoria can see perfectly well." Anthony realized his mistake. "I meant curious, intelligent children who like to explore the world in different ways." The boy seemed satisfied with the answer. "Dad, do you think Victoria will like her new clothes? She's never had clothes like this before." The day before, as arranged, Richard had taken Mrs. June and Victoria to a department store to choose clothes for the event. The elderly woman had insisted on something simple and practical, but Victoria had been enchanted by a turquoise dress that, according to Richard, made her look like a princess. "I'm sure she'll love it," Anthony replied. "And you look very smart, too." Matthew smiled, adjusting the bow tie that Celeste had just fixed. It was the first time in years that the boy had cared about his appearance. Another small victory in the long battle against the isolation he had retreated into after the accident. The intercom buzzed, the driver announcing that Mrs. June and Victoria had arrived. Anthony felt a wave of anxiety. It was the first time he would publicly introduce Victoria and her grandmother to his social circle. How would they be received? How would London's elite react to the presence of two residents from a deprived estate at such an exclusive event? "Come on, Dad!" Matthew exclaimed, already walking towards the door with the confidence of someone who knows every inch of the apartment perfectly. "I don't want to keep Victoria waiting." When the lift opened on the ground floor, Anthony saw Victoria before she saw him. The girl looked stunning in the turquoise dress, her curly hair carefully arranged, a pair of new white ballet flats on her feet. Beside her, Mrs. June looked equally transformed, wearing a simple but elegant beige suit. "Matthew, Mr. Anthony," Victoria exclaimed upon seeing them, running towards them with her characteristic enthusiasm. "Careful with the dress, girl," Mrs. June warned, but couldn't hide a proud smile. "Victoria!" Matthew extended his arms towards the voice, and the girl immediately took them in hers. "You look very handsome," she said, examining her friend with admiration. "So smart, you look like one of those boys from a soap advert." Matthew laughed, delighted with the compliment. "You must look beautiful, too. What color is your dress?" "Turquoise," Victoria replied, twirling so the dress spun around her. "The color of the sea on a sunny day," the shop lady said. "I've never seen the sea, but I imagine it must be beautiful." "It is beautiful," Matthew confirmed. "I saw it before the accident. We used to go to the beach a lot, me, my dad, and my mum." A momentary silence fell over the group. It was rare for Matthew to spontaneously mention memories from before the accident, especially those that included Louise. "One day you will see the sea." "Victoria," Anthony said, breaking the silence. "That's a promise." The girl's eyes shone. "Really, Mr. Anthony? That would be amazing." "Let's take it one step at a time," Mrs. June intervened, always pragmatic. "First, we have this event today." The four of them got into the car, Victoria and Matthew sitting in the back, talking excitedly about what they expected from the exhibition, while Anthony and Mrs. June occupied the middle seats, each lost in their own thoughts. "Are you nervous?" Anthony asked, noticing how Mrs. June repeatedly smoothed the skirt of her suit. The elderly woman gave a small smile. "A little. I've never been to an event like this with important people. I'm afraid of doing something wrong, of embarrassing myself or you." "Impossible," Anthony replied sincerely. "You have more dignity and wisdom than most of the people who will be there. And as for the others, well, if anyone has a problem with your presence or Victoria's, the problem will be theirs, not ours." Mrs. June seemed surprised by the response. "You've changed, you know, since we met. In the beginning, you seemed so rigid, distant." Anthony reflected on the observation. It was true. Something had changed in him in recent weeks. The time spent with Victoria and Mrs. June had opened a crack in the armor he had built around himself after the accident, letting in a light he thought was lost forever. "I think we've all changed a little," he replied simply. The exhibition venue was the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park, a spacious, modern space, perfect for the kind of sensory installation the Edwards Foundation had prepared. When the car stopped at the entrance, Anthony could see that the event was already busy. Photographers were capturing the arrival of guests, while waiters circulated with trays of canapés and drinks. "Wow," Victoria exclaimed as she got out of the car, her eyes wide at the grandeur of the place. "It looks like a palace." Matthew smiled, squeezing his friend's hand. "Wait until we get inside. It's huge." Anthony offered his arm to Mrs. June, who accepted it after a moment's hesitation. "Shall we?" As soon as they entered, they were greeted by Sandra Marks, the executive director of the Edwards Foundation, an elegant and efficient woman who had been coordinating the institution's work for nearly 3 years. "Anthony, so glad you've arrived," she exclaimed, kissing him on both cheeks. "And this must be Matthew. How you've grown, dear." "Hello, Dr. Marks," the boy replied politely. "This is my friend Victoria and her grandmother, Mrs. June." Sandra seemed momentarily taken aback, but quickly recovered. "A pleasure to meet you. Welcome to our sensory exhibition." "Thank you for the invitation," Mrs. June replied with her characteristic dignity. "Victoria is very excited to see the exhibition." "And she will love it, I'm sure," Sandra assured, turning back to Anthony. "The press has arrived, and some journalists would like to interview you. The Times magazine, specifically, wants photos of you with Matthew for the feature on the foundation." "First we'll see the exhibition," Anthony replied. "The interviews can wait." Sandra seemed slightly annoyed but nodded. Of course. Would you like me to accompany you?" "I can explain each installation. That won't be necessary. I know the project well, I helped develop it. But thank you for the offer." As they walked away, Anthony noticed the curious glances that followed them. It was not common to see him accompanied by people visibly from a different social class. He ignored the stares, focusing on guiding the group through the exhibition. The first installation was the Cave of Sounds, a darkened room where different types of music and sound effects were played, while the floor vibrated in sync, allowing people to feel the sound with their entire bodies. "Incredible," Victoria exclaimed, holding Matthew's hands as they both felt the floor vibrate to the sound of a symphony. "It's like the music is inside us." "I know," Matthew replied, equally amazed. "It's one of my favorite installations. I feel music differently now after I lost my sight. It's like I can touch each note." The next stop was the Gallery of Scents, a corridor where different fragrances were released, creating a complex olfactory experience that told a story. There was the smell of rain on dry earth, of freshly baked bread, of the sea air, of coffee being brewed. "Is this the smell of the sea?" Victoria asked, deeply inhaling the salty aroma that filled one of the sections. "Yes, just like on the beach in Brighton," Matthew confirmed. "I remember this smell." "It's wonderful," the girl whispered, closing her eyes as if trying to memorize the fragrance. "One day I want to smell it for real." The third installation was the Tactile Forest, a room filled with different textures that visitors were invited to explore using only their sense of touch. There were rough surfaces like tree bark, soft ones like moss, smooth like river stones, rugged like coral. Each texture represented an element of nature, creating a garden that could be experienced through the fingers. Matthew moved with confidence in this environment, guiding Victoria instead of being guided by her. "This is the part I like best," he explained, "because here I have the advantage. My fingers are more sensitive than those of people who can see, because I use them to read." Victoria watched with admiration at her friend's skill. "You're right. It's as if your fingers can see." Anthony and Mrs. June followed a few steps behind, observing the interaction between the children. "It's amazing how well they get along," Mrs. June commented. "As if they've known each other for years, not weeks." "Some connections transcend time," Anthony replied. "I think Matthew and Victoria have one of those rare connections." As they walked to the next installation, they were approached by an elegant woman about 50 years old, accompanied by a photographer. "Anthony Edwards, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Marissa Cole from the Times magazine. We're doing the feature on the foundation." "Ah, yes, of course," Anthony replied, shaking her hand. "This is my son, Matthew, his friend Victoria, and her grandmother, Mrs. June." The journalist looked curiously at Victoria and Mrs. June, obviously intrigued by their presence. "A pleasure. Are you part of the Foundation's social inclusion program. Before Anthony could answer, Victoria spoke up. "No, ma'am. We're friends of Matthew and Mr. Anthony. I'm learning Braille so I can read with Matthew." The girl's direct and sincere answer took the journalist by surprise. "Oh, how interesting. And how did you meet?" "In the park," Matthew replied. "Victoria taught me how to play football even though I can't see." The journalist's eyes lit up. Clearly she had sensed the potential for a story there. "That's fascinating. Can we talk more about this? Perhaps take some photos of you together in the exhibition." Anthony hesitated. He hadn't planned to expose Victoria and Mrs. June to the media. On the other hand, refusing now might draw even more attention. "A few photos would be acceptable," he replied cautiously. "As long as you don't identify the estate where they live or other personal details." Of course," the journalist agreed quickly, signaling to the photographer. "Just photos of the children interacting in the exhibition. It would be a beautiful illustration of the Foundation's mission, building bridges between different realities." The photos were taken in the tactile forest, with Matthew guiding Victoria, both smiling as they explored the different textures. It was a powerful image, a blind boy acting as a guide, a role reversal that perfectly captured the essence of what the exhibition aimed to convey. "Perfect," the journalist said, after the photographer had taken several shots. "Mr. Edwards, can we talk a little more about the Foundation? I promise not to take up too much of your time." Anthony looked at Mrs. June. "Do you mind staying with the children while I talk to the journalist?" "I won't be long." "Of course not, Mr. Edwards. Go ahead." As Anthony walked away with the journalist, Mrs. June continued to accompany the children through the exhibition. They went through the Room of Flavors, where different foods could be tasted blindfolded, and the Gallery of Echoes, where sounds were distorted and reflected, creating intriguing soundscapes. "Mrs. June," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Sandra Marks, the Foundation's executive director, approaching with a polite but slightly tense smile. "May we have a word?" The elderly woman nodded, intrigued. "Of course, children, stay here. I'll be right back." "Victoria, look after Matthew." "You can count on me, Gran," the girl replied, holding her friend's hand tightly. Sandra led Mrs. June to a quieter corner of the exhibition. "Mrs. June, I apologize for being so direct, but what exactly is your relationship with Anthony Edwards?" The question took the elderly woman by surprise. "My granddaughter, Victoria, is friends with his son, Matthew. We met a few weeks ago in Regent's Park." Sandra seemed relieved but still concerned. "I see. And has Anthony been helping you in any way?" Mrs. June straightened up, feeling slightly offended. "If you're asking if we receive charity from Mr. Edwards, the answer is no. I do some sewing work for him, repairs on his clothes, and he pays a fair price. My granddaughter and his son have become friends, and he has been kind enough to allow them to meet regularly." Sandra seemed to carefully consider the answer. "I'm sorry if I sounded offensive. That was not my intention. It's just that Anthony, well, he's changed a lot since the accident. He became more reserved, more closed off. Seeing him today, bringing you to the event, interacting so openly, it's a significant change." "Mr. Edwards is a good man," Mrs. June replied simply. "He loves his son very much and wants to see him happy. Victoria has managed to reach Matthew in a way no one else could. I think that's why he has welcomed us into his life." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "You know that Louise, his wife, was my friend? We studied together at university. When she passed and Matthew lost his sight, it was devastating. Anthony never fully recovered. I'm afraid he might be looking for substitutes in a way." Mrs. June frowned, not liking the insinuation. "With all due respect, Doctor, I am no one's substitute, nor is my granddaughter. We are who we are. Simple, honest people who happen to cross paths with this family. If Mr. Edwards and his son find some comfort in our company, we are happy to provide it. But we have no intention of taking anyone's place." Sandra seemed disarmed by the elderly woman's frankness. Of course. I didn't mean to offend. It's just that I worry about Anthony and Matthew. They've already suffered so much." "Pain doesn't choose social class, Doctor," Mrs. June replied, with the wisdom of one who has faced many hardships. "I also know my share of loss and difficulty. Perhaps that's why we understand each other, because pain is a universal language." Meanwhile, Anthony was talking to the journalist about the Foundation, its mission, its future projects. but his thoughts kept returning to Matthew and Victoria, to the transformation he was observing in his son. "Mr. Edwards, I couldn't help but notice the special relationship between your son and that girl, Victoria," Marissa Cole commented. "There's a story there, isn't there?" Anthony hesitated. It was not in his nature to expose his personal life, especially to the press, but something inside him said that this story, the story of Matthew and Victoria, deserved to be told. "There is," he replied finally, "a story about how a simple girl from a deprived estate managed to reach my son in a way that no specialist, no expensive treatment could. Her story about seeing beyond appearances, beyond physical or social limitations." The journalist seemed genuinely interested. "Tell me more." And Anthony told her about the meeting in the park, about the naturalness with which Victoria treated Matthew, about the adapted games, about the gradual transformation he observed in his son. He told her about Mrs. June's wisdom, about the lessons he himself was learning. "It's a powerful story," the journalist commented when he had finished. "A story about human connection, about how sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. May I include it in the feature on the foundation?" Anthony reflected for a moment. "You may, but on one condition, that the focus remains on the friendship between the children, not on their socio-economic circumstances. I don't want Victoria or Mrs. June to be portrayed as objects of charity, because they are not. They are remarkable people in their own right, who are enriching our lives as much as we are trying to enrich theirs." "I understand perfectly," the journalist agreed. "It will be an honor to tell this story in the right way." When Anthony rejoined the group, he found that Matthew and Victoria had completed the exhibition circuit and were now sitting on a bench, enjoying ice creams that a waiter had kindly offered. "Dad," Matthew exclaimed upon hearing his approaching footsteps, "you won't believe it. I won a prize." "A prize?" Anthony asked, surprised. "Yes, sir," Victoria explained excitedly. "There was a competition in the texture room. People had to identify 10 different objects, using only their sense of touch, without seeing. Matthew got them all right in less time than any other participant. He won a certificate and a Braille book about tactile art." "It's true," Matthew confirmed proudly. "The lady from the competition said she'd never seen anyone identify the objects so quickly. She said, 'I have a natural talent.'" Anthony felt his heart swell with pride. His son, who for so long had seen himself only as disabled, incapable, limited, was now experiencing the joy of being recognized for his abilities, not his limitations. "That's wonderful, son. I'm so proud of you. It was Victoria who convinced me to participate," Matthew explained. "I was scared, but she said I would be the best, because my fingers are more sensitive than other people's." "And she was right," commented Mrs. June, who was watching the scene with a serene smile. "My Jacob also had that heightened sensitivity in his hands." "It's a gift, Matthew." The word gift echoed in Anthony's mind, a gift. For 3 years, he had viewed his son's blindness exclusively as a tragedy, a limitation to be overcome at any cost. He had never considered that, perhaps, this same condition could bring with it special gifts, a different but equally valuable way of experiencing and interacting with the world. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. Anthony introduced Mrs. June and Victoria to some close friends who were genuinely charmed by the pair. The elderly woman impressed with her serene dignity and practical wisdom, while Victoria captivated everyone with her lively intelligence and unusual sensitivity. At the end of the event, as they were preparing to leave, Sandra Marks approached again. "Anthony, I must confess I was worried when I heard you were bringing unusual visitors to the event," she said in a low voice. "But now I understand. That girl is truly special. More than you can imagine," Anthony replied. "She's transforming my son's life. And mine too, in a way." Sandra looked at him with an unusual intensity. "Be careful, Anthony. I know your intentions are the best, but this kind of involvement between such different social classes, it can create expectations, dependencies. I appreciate your concern, Sandra, but I think you're mistaken on a fundamental point. I'm not the one helping Victoria and Mrs. June. They are the ones helping me, teaching me to see the world in a way I had forgotten." On the way back, as the car crossed the city, Matthew slept with his head resting on Victoria's shoulder, exhausted but happy after a day of intense sensory experiences. The girl looked out the window, observing the urban landscape with fascination. "Did you enjoy the exhibition?" Anthony asked in a low voice, so as not to wake Matthew. "It was the best day of my life, Mr. Anthony," Victoria replied, with that disarming frankness that was characteristic of her. "I never imagined places like this existed, where people can feel the world in so many different ways." That's exactly the goal of the foundation, to show that there are many ways to experience the world, each valuable in its own right. "Just like what I always tell Matthew," the girl commented, "that he doesn't need his eyes to see, that he can use his other senses." "You are very wise for your age, Victoria," the girl shrugged without affectation. "It's not wisdom, Mr. Anthony, it's just seeing things as they are, not as people say they are." On the seat beside them, Mrs. June watched her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Mr. Edwards, I would like to thank you for today. It was a very special experience for Victoria. And for me too, I confess. There's no need to thank me, Mrs. June. It was a pleasure to have you with us. That journalist, is she really going to write about Victoria and Matthew?" "Yes, but don't worry. She promised to focus on their friendship, not on their circumstances. You won't be exposed inappropriately." The elderly woman nodded thoughtfully. "I just don't want people to think we're taking advantage of your kindness. I heard some comments today." "What comments?" Anthony asked, frowning. "Nothing important. Just noticed some looks, some conversations that stopped when I approached. It's natural, I suppose. We're not from the same world as those people. I'm sorry about that." "Mrs. June, some people are limited by their prejudices, unable to see beyond appearances. Don't worry. Mr. Edwards, I've faced worse things in life. The important thing is that the children had fun, that Matthew had a special day. That alone was worth any discomfort." When they reached the Millwall estate, it was already getting dark. Anthony insisted on walking Mrs. June and Victoria to their door, carrying the sleeping boy in his arms. "You don't have to go to the trouble," the elderly woman protested. "The alleys are narrow, dark. It's a matter of safety. Mrs. June, I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you on the way." So the four of them entered the estate, Anthony carrying Matthew, who was still fast asleep. As they moved through the narrow alleys, Anthony noticed the curious stares of the residents. It wasn't common to see a man like him, visibly wealthy, walking around there. When they arrived at Mrs. June's small house, they were met with a surprise. Someone had painted the facade, repaired the roof, and installed a new door. "What is this?" the elderly woman asked, dumbfounded. "Who did this?" A neighbor who was watching the scene from the next door approached. "It was the men who came yesterday, Mrs. June. Said it was a gift from their boss. They worked all day, fixed everything, even put new flooring inside." Mrs. June turned to Anthony, her eyes blazing. "Was this you?" Anthony felt his face flush. He hadn't planned for Mrs. June to discover his little intervention so quickly. "Just some basic repairs, Mrs. June, for safety mainly." "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice tense. "I didn't accept this." "Gran, don't be angry," Victoria intervened, sensing the growing tension. "Look how nice it is." "It's not about whether it's nice or not, Victoria," the elderly woman replied firmly. "It's a matter of dignity, of independence." "Mrs. June," Anthony began carefully, "it was not my intention to offend you. I just wanted to give back in some way for everything you have done for Matthew." "For us? Give back? Do you think our friendship has a price? That it can be bought or sold like a commodity? Of course not. I never thought that. It was just a gesture of gratitude, nothing more." The argument was interrupted by Matthew, who was starting to wake up in his father's arms. "Where are we? What's happening?" "We're at Victoria's house, son," Anthony replied, relieved by the interruption. "We came to bring them home safely." The boy yawned, still sleepy. "Victoria, thank you for today. It was amazing." The tension in Mrs. June's face softened a little upon hearing Matthew's voice. "Come inside, Victoria. It's getting late." "Can I say goodbye to Matthew, Gran?" The elderly woman nodded reluctantly. Victoria approached Matthew, who was now standing, holding his father's hand. "See you on Monday, Matthew. I'll think of new tests for us to do." "I can't wait," the boy replied, smiling. Victoria gave him a quick hug, then took her grandmother's hand and went inside. Mrs. June remained at the door, looking at Anthony with an expression that mixed gratitude and resentment. "I appreciate what you did, Mr. Edwards. But please, next time, talk to me first. We are not a charity project. I apologize, Mrs. June. It was not my intention to offend you. I just wanted to help." The elderly woman sighed, her expression softening a little. "I know your intentions are good. But understand, I have spent my whole life taking care of myself and my own through my own efforts. This sense of independence, of self-sufficiency, it's all I have. I understand and I respect that deeply. I promise that in the future, I will discuss any ideas with you before implementing them." Mrs. June nodded, seeming satisfied with the promise. "Good night, Mr. Edwards. Good night, Matthew. Thank you for today." "Good night, Mrs. June," Anthony replied. "And despite everything, thank you for allowing Victoria to be a part of my son's life. It means more than you can imagine." As they walked back to the car, Anthony reflected on what had happened. He had acted on impulse, wanting to improve the living conditions of Mrs. June and Victoria, but had not adequately considered the impact it would have on the elderly woman's pride and dignity. It was a valuable lesson. Not all help is welcome, especially when it arrives unsolicited, imposing a worldview that may not be shared by the other. "Dad," Matthew said suddenly, "was Mrs. June upset with you?" "A little, son. I did something without consulting her first, and it bothered her." "What?" "I sent some workers to fix her house. I thought it would be a nice surprise, but I didn't consider how she would feel." Matthew seemed to reflect on this. "Victoria told me that her gran is very proud, that she doesn't like to accept help even when she needs it." "Yes, I've noticed that. Mrs. June is a woman of extraordinary dignity." "You know, Dad, Victoria said something interesting the other day. She said that sometimes people with more money think they can solve everything with money. But some things, the most important ones, can't be bought." Anthony looked at his son, surprised by the depth of the observation. "And what do you think about that?" "I think she's right. Like my sight. You spent a lot of money trying to make me see again, but it didn't work. And then Victoria came along, who has no money at all, and she helped me see in a different way without spending anything." His son's words hit Anthony like a revelation. It was true. He had spent the last 3 years trying to buy a solution for Matthew's blindness, when perhaps the real solution lay in something much simpler, much deeper: acceptance, human connection, a new way of perceiving and interacting with the world. "You are absolutely right, son. And that's a lesson I am slowly learning thanks to you and Victoria." When they arrived at the apartment, Matthew had already fallen asleep again. Anthony carried him to bed, removed his shoes and covered him. He stood for a few moments watching his son's serene face, marveling at the transformation he saw there. 3 years of grief, of anger, of denial were finally beginning to give way to acceptance, to hope. And all thanks to a 9-year-old girl, from a world completely different from his own, who had taught his son to see in a way no doctor or therapy had managed. "Thank you, Victoria," Anthony whispered, though the girl was miles away. "Thank you for bringing the light back into our lives." The feature in the Times magazine was published 2 weeks after the sensory exhibition. It took up 3 full pages with the headline, "Seeing with the Heart: The Extraordinary Friendship That Transformed a Blind Boy's Life." The photos showed Matthew and Victoria at the exhibition, smiling as they explored the tactile installations together, and also Anthony watching the children with a look that mixed tenderness and admiration. The text, written by Marissa Cole with surprising sensitivity, told the story of the meeting in the park, the instant friendship between the children, and the gradual transformation observed in Matthew. The journalist had kept her promise. The focus was on the children's friendship, not their socio-economic circumstances. Victoria was described as an extraordinarily wise and sensitive girl, not as a poor girl or a deprived girl. Mrs. June was presented as a lady of remarkable dignity, with no emphasis on her financial situation. The reaction was immediate. On the morning of publication, Anthony's phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists wanting interviews, TV producers interested in doing reports, moved people offering donations to the Edwards Foundation. Richard, his personal assistant, had practically moved into the apartment's office trying to organize the chaos that had ensued. "Mr. Edwards, Panorama wants to do a special report for Sunday. CNN International has also been in touch, interested in including the story in their Extraordinary Friendships series." And the Guardian would like an exclusive interview. Anthony sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He hadn't anticipated such a huge reaction. His intention in agreeing to the feature had been simply to publicize the Foundation's work, not to become the center of a media storm. "Refuse everything, Richard. I will not expose Matthew, Victoria, and Mrs. June to this circus." Richard looked concerned. "Sir, with all due respect, this could be a huge opportunity for the Foundation. The kind of visibility that money can't buy. My son and his friends are not marketing tools, Richard. I've made my decision." The assistant nodded, disappointed but respectful. "As you wish, sir." "Oh, Dr. Marks called. She said donations to the Foundation have tripled since the feature was published. She wants to schedule an urgent meeting." Anthony checked his watch. It was almost time to pick up Matthew from his occupational therapy session. Afterwards, they would pick up Victoria and Mrs. June for their weekly trip to Regent's Park. "Tell Sandra we'll meet tomorrow at the Foundation's office." When he hung up the phone, Anthony noticed Celeste watching him from the office doorway, a worried expression on her face. "Is there a problem, Celeste?" The nurse entered, closing the door behind her. "Mr. Edwards, I think we need to talk about this situation." "What situation, exactly?" "This public exposure, the feature in the Times, all these interview requests. This can't be good for Matthew or for that girl and her grandmother." Anthony frowned. "That's precisely why I've just refused all the requests. I don't want to expose anyone." "It's not just that, sir. It's this whole situation with Victoria and Mrs. June. It's becoming more and more complex, more public. Have you thought about the long-term implications?" "What implications exactly?" Celeste hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Matthew is very attached to Victoria. What will happen when she inevitably leaves our lives? Because it will happen, sir. People from such different worlds, they don't usually stay connected indefinitely." Anthony felt a growing unease. It was a thought he had had himself, but one he tried to push away. "I don't see why their friendship can't continue," he replied, more firmly than he felt. "Matthew and Victoria have a special connection." "They are children, Mr. Edwards. Children make friends and lose them just as easily. But Matthew is different. He has invested everything in this friendship, all his ability to trust again after the trauma. If Victoria leaves his life—" "I don't see why that would happen," Anthony interrupted, irritation growing in his voice. "I've done everything to facilitate this friendship. I've provided transport, braille lessons, activities together." "Exactly, sir. You are artificially maintaining this friendship with resources that won't last forever. What will happen when Matthew goes to a specialized boarding school for the visually impaired, or when Victoria has to move with her grandmother somewhere else? Life happens, Mr. Edwards, and when it does, I'm afraid Matthew will suffer much more than if he had never met this girl." Celeste's words hit Anthony like a physical blow. It was true. He was using his resources, his money, his power, to maintain a connection that perhaps under normal circumstances would never have flourished. He was creating an artificial bubble, protected from the reality of the world. "I appreciate your concern, Celeste, but I ask you to trust me. I know what I'm doing." The nurse nodded, resigned. "Of course, sir. I just hope you're thinking about what's best for Matthew in the long term, not just his momentary happiness." After Celeste left, Anthony remained in his study, her words echoing in his mind. Was he really doing what was best for Matthew? Or was he unconsciously creating a situation that would eventually cause his son more pain? His thoughts were interrupted by the intercom, the driver announcing it was time to pick up Matthew. Anthony grabbed his jacket and left, determined to put these worries aside, at least for a while. At the occupational therapy clinic, he found Matthew talking animatedly with his therapist, Dr. Louise Carter, a young and energetic woman who had been working with the boy for almost 2 years. "Dad!" Matthew exclaimed upon hearing the familiar footsteps. "Dr. Carter said I'm making incredible progress." "It's true," the therapist confirmed, smiling at Anthony. "Matthew is much more confident, more willing to try new things. It's a remarkable transformation. Victoria helps me a lot," Matthew explained proudly. "She makes me practice the exercises Dr. Carter gives me at home, and she invents others too." "This Victoria seems to be a very positive influence," the therapist commented. "I read the feature in the Times. It's a truly inspiring story. Anthony smiled, thanking her politely, but preferring not to dwell on the subject. He said goodbye to the therapist and left with Matthew, who could barely contain his excitement as they walked to the car. Dad, today is park day with Victoria. She said she has a surprise for me. Really? What kind of surprise? I don't know, she didn't say, but she said it's something that will help me see the world in a new way. As they drove to the Millwall estate to pick up Victoria and Mrs. June, Anthony watched his son in the rearview mirror. Matthew was unrecognizable compared to the bitter, withdrawn boy of a few months ago. He smiled, talked, showed curiosity about the world around him, and all thanks to the influence of a girl who, by chance, had crossed his path one morning in the park. When they arrived at the estate, Anthony saw Victoria waiting at the entrance of the main alley, but Mrs. June was not with her. As they approached, he realized something was wrong. The girl's normally radiant face was serious, worried. "Victoria," Matthew called out, recognizing his friend's unusual silence. "Did something happen?" "My Gran's not well," she replied, her voice small. "She can't come with us today." Anthony frowned, concerned. "What's wrong with her? Is it serious?" "High blood pressure again. The doctor from the clinic came to see her and said she needs to rest, take her medicine properly." "And she's going to be home alone?" Anthony asked, already thinking about the implications. "Maybe we should cancel the outing, stay with her." "No, no," Victoria interrupted quickly. "Mrs. Adelaide is with her, and Gran insisted I come. She said I needed some fresh air, that there was no point staying at home worrying." Anthony assessed the situation. It seemed irresponsible to take the girl out while her grandmother was ill, but on the other hand, if Mrs. June had insisted and had someone looking after her. "All right then, but we'll cut the trip short, and afterwards I'll stop by the chemist to buy the medicine your grandmother needs." "There's no need, Mr. Anthony," Victoria replied quickly. "The doctor already left the medicine from the clinic, and Gran wouldn't like it if you bought more things for her." Anthony nodded, understanding the girl's concern for her grandmother's pride. "I understand. So let's go to the park, but we won't stay as long, okay?" On the way to Regent's Park, Victoria seemed less cheerful than usual, answering Matthew's questions with short, distracted phrases. "Are you sad because of your Gran?" the boy asked, sensitive to the change in his friend's mood. "A little," she admitted, "but there's something else too." "What?" Anthony and Matthew asked almost simultaneously. Victoria hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Some kids at school saw the magazine, the one with our picture. They're saying things, mean things." "What things?" Matthew asked, worried. "That I'm only being your friend for what I can get, that I'm... what's the word? Oh, taking advantage of your family." Victoria's voice trembled slightly. "But it's not true, Matthew. I swear it's not." "I know it's not," the boy replied firmly. "You're my real friend." Anthony felt a wave of anger and guilt. The media exposure, which he had naively allowed, was having negative consequences for Victoria. Children could be cruel, especially when they identified someone who stood out from the group. "Victoria, don't pay any attention to those comments," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Some people can't understand true friendship, so they invent petty reasons to explain it." The girl nodded but still seemed shaken. "It's just, they told everyone. Now even the teachers look at me differently. And there are people on the estate talking too. I heard Mrs. Marlene telling my Gran to be careful, that rich folk don't mix with poor folk without a hidden agenda." Anthony felt the weight of the situation grow even heavier. What had started as something simple and pure, the friendship between two children, was turning into something complicated, laden with social implications that even he hadn't fully anticipated. "Victoria, look at me," he said, turning in his seat to face her. "You are an extraordinary person. What you've done for Matthew, the way you've helped him reconnect with the world, that's priceless. Don't let anyone diminish the value of what you two have built together. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, a small smile beginning to form on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Anthony." When they arrived at the park, Anthony watched the children walk off towards the lawn, Victoria guiding Matthew with the naturalness of someone who has been doing it for years. Pulling various objects from the colorful backpack she was carrying, She produced things Anthony couldn't identify from a distance. Sitting on a nearby bench, he kept his eyes on the children while his mind worked, analyzing the problem from every possible angle. The situation was getting more complex by the day. The media exposure had brought unwanted attention. The malicious comments were affecting Victoria. Mrs. June's health was another worrying factor. What would happen if she could no longer care for her granddaughter? Anne Celeste was right on a fundamental point. What would happen when life inevitably separated Matthew and Victoria? When he went to the specialized school in London, and she remained at the state school on the estate, when their paths naturally diverged, an idea that had been germinating in his mind for weeks began to take more concrete shape. It was a radical solution, one that would drastically change the course of several lives, but it might be the only way to preserve what Matthew and Victoria had built together. His phone vibrated. It was Sandra Marks. Anthony, I know we scheduled for tomorrow, but we really need to talk today. The situation is getting out of control. What situation exactly? The donations, the interview requests, the inquiries about the girl from the magazine. It's madness. I just got a call from a toy company, wanting to create a line of inclusive dolls inspired by Matthew and Victoria's friendship. Anthony felt his stomach sink. The commercialization of his son's friendship was exactly what he had feared. Refuse everything, Sandra. Absolutely everything. But Anthony, some of these proposals are really good for the foundation. Think of the impact we could have, the additional resources for our projects. The foundation already has sufficient resources. I will not allow them to turn my son and Victoria into mascots or a marketing strategy. There was a silence on the other end of the line. When Sandra spoke again, her voice had a different, more personal tone. Anthony, can I speak frankly? Of course. I'm worried about you. About your recent decisions, this fixation with this girl and her grandmother. It doesn't seem healthy. Fixation? What are you talking about? You've rearranged your entire life around them. You've cancelled important meetings, delegated responsibilities you would never delegate, all to spend more time with them. And now you're refusing valuable opportunities for the foundation because you want to protect them. Don't you think you're, perhaps, substituting Louise in some way? The suggestion hit Anthony like a slap. That's absurd, Sandra. Victoria's a child, a friend of my son, and Mrs. June is an elderly woman raising her granddaughter alone. I'm not substituting anyone. I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate, Anthony. Just that perhaps you are unconsciously trying to recreate the family you lost, filling the voids that Louise left. I don't have time for this kind of amateur analysis, Sandra. My son is happy for the first time in 3 years. That's all that matters to me. And what about the girl? Have you considered that you might not be doing her a favor, exposing her to a lifestyle she can never sustain on her own? When this is all over and she goes back to her reality, who said it's going to be over? Anthony interrupted, irritation evident in his voice. And who said she'll have to go back to her reality? Maybe I have other plans. What plans, Anthony? Sandra's voice now had a tone of alarm. I have to go, Sandra. We'll talk tomorrow. Anthony ended the call feeling his heart race. He hadn't planned to reveal his thoughts to anyone yet, especially not to Sandra, who clearly wouldn't approve. But the words had slipped out in the heat of the moment. Watching the children play in the distance, he saw that Victoria had put on a blindfold. Matthew was holding her hand, guiding her across the lawn, a role reversal that seemed symbolic in so many ways. The idea he had been cultivating crystallized in his mind. He would offer Mrs. June and Victoria the opportunity to move into a comfortable flat in a safe neighborhood. He would arrange for Victoria a place at a quality private school, the same one where he planned to enroll Matthew. He would ensure that Mrs. June received the best available medical treatment. He would create a situation where the children could grow up together, without the constant threat of separation due to socio-economic circumstances. It wouldn't be easy. He would have to present the proposal in a way that didn't offend Mrs. June's pride. He would have to ensure that Victoria didn't suffer even more prejudice for being adopted by a wealthy family. He would have to carefully navigate the legal, social, and emotional complications of such an arrangement. But as he saw Matthew laughing while guiding a blindfolded Victoria, as he remembered the extraordinary transformation he had observed in his son over the past few months, he felt that any challenge would be worth it. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Richard. Mr. Edwards, I'm calling to inform you that the research you requested is ready, about scholarship programs in private schools and about the documentation needed to become a child's legal guardian. Thank you, Richard. We'll discuss this when I get back. And please also prepare a survey of flats for sale in the block of St. Paul's School. 3 bedrooms preferably. Yes, sir. Oh, and Dr. Evans called. He said he has news about an experimental treatment in Canada that could benefit Matthew. He asked you to call him back as soon as possible. Anthony hesitated. A few weeks ago, news like this would have been the most important thing in the world to him. Now it seemed almost irrelevant. Not because he didn't wish for Matthew's sight to be restored, but because he had finally understood that his son could have a full and happy life even without seeing. Thank you, Richard. I'll call him later. He hung up and turned back to watch the children. Matthew had now taken the blindfold off Victoria and was showing her something in his hands. It looked like a small object he had found by touch. The girl looked on with fascination as he explained, gesturing animatedly. It was a heartwarming scene, a blind boy teaching a sighted girl to see the world in a different way. A perfect reversal of expectations, a lesson in how limitations are often just a matter of perspective. The sun was beginning to set when Anthony finally called the children. It was time to go back. He had promised the outing would be shorter today so they could check on Mrs. June. "What were you two doing over there?" he asked as they walked back to the car. "I was teaching Victoria to see with her other senses," Matthew replied proudly. "I put a blindfold on her and guided her, just like she always does with me. Then I made her guess objects by touch, smell, and sound. It was amazing," Victoria exclaimed. "At first I was scared because I couldn't see anything. But then I started paying attention to the sounds, the smells, the texture of the ground under my feet. I started to see in a different way. That's how I see the world all the time," Matthew explained. "It's not as bad as people think." Anthony felt a wave of emotion as he heard his son speak like that, with acceptance, even a certain pride in his condition. It was an extraordinary transformation for a boy who, just a few months ago, had defined himself exclusively by his disability, seeing it as a prison from which he would never escape. On the way back to the Millwall estate, the children chattered excitedly in the back seat, planning their next senses lesson, as they called their experiments. Anthony listened in silence, his mind occupied with the details of the plan he was formulating. When they reached the alley leading to Mrs. June's house, Anthony insisted on walking Victoria. "I want to see how your grandmother is," he explained in the face of the girl's hesitation. "But the house is a mess," Victoria protested, without much conviction. "And Gran doesn't like having visitors when she's ill." "I'm not a visitor, Victoria. I'm a concerned friend. And I promise not to stay long." Matthew insisted on going too, so the 3 of them walked through the narrow alleys to the small house. When they entered, they found Mrs. June lying on the sofa, with a compress on her forehead. Mrs. Adelaide, the retired teacher, was sitting beside her. "Hello, Mr. Edwards," Mrs. Adelaide greeted, standing up. "Mrs. June is better now. Her blood pressure has stabilized since she took her medicine." "You didn't have to come," Mrs. June said, trying to sit up. "I told Victoria it was nothing serious. Please stay lying down," Anthony requested, approaching. "How are you feeling?" "Like an old woman who doesn't take her medicine properly," she replied with a faint smile. "Nothing a good rest won't fix." Anthony noticed that despite her smile, Mrs. June looked genuinely unwell. There were dark shadows under her eyes, and her skin had a grayish tone that worried him. "Do you have regular medical checkups?" "A cardiologist?" "I have the local clinic." "She," replied curtly. Like everyone else on this estate, Anthony suppressed the urge to immediately offer access to private specialists, knowing such an offer would be met with resistance. Instead, he changed the subject. The children had a lot of fun today. Matthew taught Victoria to see with her other senses. Mrs. June's face lit up at this. "Did he really? How wonderful. My Jacob always used to say that those who only see with their eyes don't see half the world." "Your nephew sounds like he was a very special person," Anthony commented. He was. "So young but with such wisdom." Mrs. June paused, a coughing fit interrupting her words. Mrs. Adelaide immediately offered her water, while Victoria watched, worried. When the coughing subsided, Mrs. June looked even more tired. "I think we should let her rest," Anthony said, standing up. "But I would like to talk to you tomorrow, if you're feeling better. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss." "What kind of ideas?" Mrs. June asked, suspicious. "About the children's future. About how we can ensure they stay together, that they can develop their full potential." Mrs. June frowned, but nodded. "All right, we can talk tomorrow. But I'm warning you now, I'm not interested in charity, Mr. Edwards. I know that, Mrs. June, and I respect it deeply. What I have in mind is more of a partnership, something that benefits all of us." They said their goodbyes, Anthony promising to return the next day. On the way back to the car, Matthew held his hand tightly, unusually silent. "Are you all right, son?" Anthony asked, concerned. "Mrs. June is going to be okay, isn't she, Dad? What happened to Uncle Jacob won't happen to her, will it?" The question took Anthony by surprise. "Of course not, son. Mrs. June just needs to rest and take her medicine properly. She'll be fine soon." "Promise?" There was a vulnerability in Matthew's voice that broke Anthony's heart. His son, who had already lost his mother and his sight in a single traumatic event, now feared losing his best friend's grandmother, a woman who had become an important figure in his life. "I promise I will do everything in my power to ensure Mrs. June receives the best possible care." Matthew seemed satisfied with the answer, squeezing his father's hand in a silent thank you. On the way home, Anthony mentally finalized the details of his proposal for Mrs. June. He knew it would be a difficult conversation, that he would likely face initial resistance, but he was determined to find a solution that would allow Matthew and Victoria to continue their extraordinary journey together. Because, in the end, it wasn't just Matthew who was learning to see in a different way. He himself, Anthony Edwards, the powerful businessman who believed that everything had a price, that any problem could be solved with enough money, was learning to see the world with new eyes, not physical ones, but those of the heart. And that, perhaps, was the most extraordinary transformation of all.